Okay, testing. Okay, I'm going to test to see if those online can hear when I'm speaking with the computer mic on. Trustee Archer, are you able to hear okay? Oh, I can't hear her back. Okay, Trustee Archer, just testing with my computer audio if you can hear. No. Testing our sound. Trustee Archer, can you hear with this sound? I don't think she can. Oh, okay, she can, but... Okay, we'll try to continue the meeting. I apologize, this did work 2 weeks ago just fine, so we'll have to figure out the technical glitches. I'm going to start our meeting with the meeting roll call, so we will see that in the room we have trustees Noble, Wong, Tutt, Danko, Miller, Mulholland, Fairman, DeHaab, White, and Buck. Online, we have Trustee Archer, and I'll invite you, Trustee Archer, to turn your camera on for roll call. We also have student trustees Lee and Mahmoud with us. We are also joined in the gallery by a number of community members, so thank you for being here tonight. And we have moved to a live stream on YouTube for the meeting, and hopefully those on Teams can also hear as well. Just given that we have a lot of people here with us tonight, I did want to set some clear expectations and norms at the beginning of the meeting. Our gallery members, of course, are here to have an important presence for our board meeting, but also to observe the board meeting. And so I just want to remind everyone, we have topics that we might be discussing that cause emotions to run high. There may be people with different viewpoints and strong feelings about the topics. So I want to remind you that we do expect everyone in this room to adhere to the HWDSB Code of Conduct. And really, it boils down to treating everyone with dignity and respect at all times, particularly when there is a disagreement. So for our public members, please keep your applause to a minimum and do not yell or disrupt the meeting. We appreciate if you can keep side conversations to a whisper and be respectful to everyone in the room. And of course, we're all here in the best interest of our children, and we're discussing how to best serve our students and district. So if any individual in the room, that applies to staff, trustees, our audience members, fail to maintain decorum and sort of breach that code of conduct, I do have a responsibility as chair to remove you from the meeting, and this applies to everyone in the room. I don't think that is going to be necessary, and I appreciate everyone joining us tonight, but I will have to provide a warning and may ask someone to leave the room if that's necessary. Okay, let's move into our first item, which is delegations. Our first delegator is Tanya Collins. And so, Tanya, I'd invite you to come to the podium, please. I want to thank everyone who has requested to delegate. We had a number of submissions, and as per our trustee policy manual, we have a maximum of 3 oral delegations at regular board meetings. So anyone who is not able to be accommodated for an oral delegation was invited to submit a written delegation, and we do have those in our packages for trustees, but also available online for the public. And those are for consideration. So I do want to also acknowledge that we've had a lot of correspondence in terms of emails and calls, and appreciate everyone sharing their perspectives. So thank you for joining us at the podium, Delegate Collins. Just a reminder that you do have 5 minutes for your delegation, and I believe you're sharing your time. Following the delegation, I'll allow trustees to ask brief questions of the delegate for clarification only. And if we can aim to wrap those up within about 5 minutes so that we can move along in the meeting, that would be helpful. So I'm going to invite you to get started, and I'll start the time. I'll give you a signal when we're getting close to the 1 minute mark and when 5 minutes is up.
Thank you. I'm delegating tonight on behalf of the Equity Network, but we have chosen to read a letter from a parent as our delegation. This is Joanne. Joanne's son, Hudson, is 5 years old and attends Sir William Osler Elementary School in Dundas. He was born 5 weeks premature with a congenital heart defect, trachea defect, and lung abnormalities. He has undergone 3 open heart surgeries, 11 cardiac catheterizations, 2 craniotomies, and has had a stroke. He is neurodiverse and physically disabled. Let me repeat that he is 5 years old. In particular, he is at extreme risk from respiratory infections, and they often result in hospital admissions to intensive care units, require increased oxygen support, up to and including intubation, require frequent suctioning to clear secretions and the administration of IV antibiotics. Due to Hudson's very complex medical status and need for frequent cardiac procedures, it was recommended that he not attend daycare or preschool. For his junior kindergarten year, the COVID numbers were too high and there was no vaccine for his age group, so his medical team recommended that he attend remotely. Consequently, this year has been his first opportunity to attend school and interact with his peers the way a typical child would have been doing since they were far younger. In May, Hudson was diagnosed with right-sided heart failure. A silver lining of this diagnosis was that he was finally able to stop wearing oxygen 24/7, something he has required almost constantly since birth. He was, for the first time, able to be free of an oxygen tube and being followed by someone carrying his oxygen tank when he started school in September. The downside is that he is even more susceptible to negative outcomes from respiratory viruses. To go to school, Hudson requires a nurse to attend with him to monitor his oxygen level, attend to his gastronomy tube and tube feeding, administer medication, and if necessary, administer the AED that has to be with him at all times. Both he and his nurse wear a mask at school at all times, except when eating and drinking. This is despite him being medically exempt from wearing a mask. Shortly after starting school, Hudson caught rhinovirus. To most, this would be a common cold. To Hudson, it is a downward spiral that has resulted in him being sick almost continuously since September as the virus turned into bacterial pneumonia that will not clear, despite multiple courses of antibiotics, including administration by IV. He has had to go back on oxygen 24/7 and at a higher rate than he has ever required previously, except if he was admitted to the hospital. Despite all of this, he continues to wear a mask, but because the other children and adults at his school do not do so, he is exposed to far more germs than he otherwise would be. This risks his life. Every day when Joanne sends her son to school on the bus, she does so knowing that going to school may kill him because people have decided that despite evidence showing that masking reduces the spread of airborne viruses, it is too much to wear a small piece of material on their faces to protect those around them. Joanne does not have the ability to homeschool her son. She works full-time, and so does her husband, to pay for all the extraordinary costs that come with having a child with extraordinary and complex medical needs. He also needs the socialization that comes from being at school with his peers for his own development and mental health. The failure to mask has already directly led to the pediatric healthcare crisis going on in this province. There are no pediatric beds available. Not for Hudson with his complex medical needs, or for your children, or for any children due to the dire situation we find ourselves in. Hospitals in other provinces that will sometimes take patients when our own hospitals are overloaded have closed their borders to Ontario patients because they too are facing a pediatric healthcare crisis. We are getting precariously close to having to triage children to determine who will get care in this province. The choice not to wear a mask and not to mandate masking is why we are here. Earlier in the COVID-19 pandemic, there was talk of having to triage adults for care and needing to protect the healthcare system as a result. And as a result, the province, municipalities, and school boards, including this one, mandated masking. At no point during the COVID-19 pandemic to date did the state of adult healthcare in this province even approach the crisis we are already in with regard to pediatric healthcare. And yet the province, municipalities, and school boards have failed to take any steps to protect children in the healthcare system. For Joanne's family, this has resulted in Hudson not being able to get a necessary cardiac MRI. The constant strain on his lungs since he got sick in September has caused pulmonary edema, fluid to collect in his lungs. This has to be checked to see whether his heart failure has progressed and needs more aggressive intervention. The scan was to occur last week, but was canceled both because there is concern about his lungs' ability to recover from sedation, and also because if something did go wrong and he needed to be admitted, there are no beds available for him in the intensive care unit. We have a pediatric hospital in our backyard. It has already had to send patients out of area to obtain required emergency treatment that would usually be provided locally, where the child and their family would have access to their support system. How many more children and families will be affected by this before those elected to protect children and their families act? Doing the right thing is not always easy. There are always those who will take the opposite view and argue that their liberty and personal autonomy are affected by a masking mandate, that their rights are being infringed. However, the Human Rights Tribunal has already stated that masking mandates do not infringe human rights as long as exemptions are made for people who have a disability that makes wearing one not possible.
Thank you, Delegate Collins. That is, I actually missed the 1 minute point, so that was 6 minutes, but thank you so much for sharing that information in Hudson's story. I'll just open the floor up for questions for clarification on the delegation specifically. Okay, I'm not seeing any. Thank you so much for, Trustee Dahab?
Yes, I would just like to thank you for sharing your story and for speaking with us today, and looking forward to making a decision that protects Hudson. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, I'd like to invite Jennifer Abatiello to the podium for your delegation. Jennifer, again, it's 5 minutes, and I will really aim to give that 1 minute hand up warning so that I don't have to cut you off. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Okay. Well, thank you for allowing me to speak. I know there's many people behind here who have requested to speak, and as you mentioned, their written delegations are available to read. I will not be able to represent everything they want to represent, but I'll do my best based on my experience with my children in the school system. I think we can all agree that we are here for the safety of our children, physically, mentally, and emotionally. I can also think we can agree, based on the previous speaker, that the emergency rooms are under pressure. The question is whether we can do that and solve that with masks. And the answer is no.
I'll just remind the audience if you can hold your applause so that we can hear the delegate.
We have yet to be shown any evidence that masks are effective. Kids get viruses. The difference is they are now being exposed to multiple viruses earlier, and in multiple cases like the RSV, the flu, and COVID. I think many of us, maybe I'm the old one here, but my kids are 8 and 10, and I remember when they started daycare before COVID. I braced myself for them to be sick more often. How many of you can relate to that? I knew that that was going to happen because their immune system wasn't developed. I remember my doctor also telling me, don't worry, especially my first child, you always worry more with the first child, you've never been through it. Let your kid play in the dirt. They need the immunity, the exposure to bacteria to build immunity. The past few years, we have not been able to build our immunity, and so we are paying the price today. Our kids no longer should be paying the price for decisions that they were not able to make. Hospitals are overcrowded, but let's talk about why. There's only 111 beds for pediatric kids in Ontario. What's being done about that? Parents have been living in fear for the past few years, so yes, they rush to the emergency room because they don't have access to a primary care physician. What alternatives do they have other than the emergency room? And also, how many of you tried to get Tylenol for kids over the counter? They have to go to the hospital in order to help reduce the fever and the pain that their children may be experiencing. Otherwise, they wouldn't be going to the emergency room. HWDSB's mission is to empower students to learn and grow to their full potential in a diverse world. These are your HWDSB words on your website. It's committed to learning, equity, engagement, and innovation. Masks are being proposed as a means to safety, but it goes to these key values that HWDSB needs to uphold. To be honest, it's also besides the point as to whether masks are effective or not. Have you ever seen a child wear this? Like this, maybe? Like this? Full of saliva after all day, dropped on the floor. Does it work? Not for our kids. But the price is beyond that. The price, like I said, is emotionally, physically, and mentally. My son is 10 years old, neurodiverse, and has faced environments that are not safe. Why? Because nonverbal cues for young kids are equally important. They cannot read cues of safety without seeing those facial expressions. When there's no safety, kids go into fight, flight, or freeze. My 10-year-old goes into freeze, but he is in a classroom with many neurodiverse kids that go into fight. He has come home with scratches and bruises on his body, increasing his anxiety and fear of going into the classroom. What strain does this put on teachers? I think there's teachers in the room here. They are in a position to have to enforce mask rules, power struggles, consequences for kids that won't comply. All this leading to stress, burnout, and not a positive learning environment for our kids. Masking exacerbates incidences of anxiety, depression, and doesn't provide an equitable learning environment for all. Let's stop the collateral damage, especially to our kids. But what do we do instead? I'm not saying do nothing. Let's focus what we can do within our control. Education, that's our wheelhouse, isn't it? Can we not educate parents on how to build immunity for their kids? Workshops and seminars and learnings on importance of sleep, healthy diet, proper hand washing. How do we keep children at home? Parents are stressed. How do we support the workplace to allow them to stay home with a sick child? Educate on when to go to the emergency room and how to care for a sick child at home. If parents are worried about their kids' health, there is the option of the flu vaccine, an option if that what makes them feel safe. But ultimately, equality through choice. Those that want to wear a mask, go ahead. The families that choose not to wear a mask, let them make that choice. Ethically, the onus is on all of you to show us that there's evidence that masks are effective, and there is none to be shown. That they are not.
Thank you to the delegate. I let you go a little bit over time, but if I can pause you there and turn to trustees to see if there's questions for clarification.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, Trustee Tutt, please go ahead.
Can you hear me? Thank you, Chair, and through you. Madam, thank you for your comments. I can sense your frustration and with the system, and I'm just curious, for clarity's sake, some of the concerns that you shared, have you, obviously probably go beyond the school board, have you shared those frustrations with public health or the provincial government?
Public health have not made the decision to require masking in schools.
And have you shared your concerns with the...
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for your delegation.
Thank you.
I'd like to call, and again, thank you. If we can minimize the applause so we can keep moving through our agenda, I would like to call Dr. Joseph Oliver to the podium for his delegation.
Yes.
Yep, that works. And so again, I'll give you a 1-minute warning and try to wrap you up at 5 minutes if you're going over. Please go ahead.
Thank you for having me. I'm a pediatrician in Hamilton and my family live in Ward 1. All pandemic, I have seen doctors put on pedestals and deferred to, and I think that is dangerous. So I want to be clear that all facts I'll mention today come from disease modeling specialists, school safety experts, or behavioral scientists, as well as some colleagues, parents, and kids, and at one point, arguably nature show narrator David Attenborough. My focus is on kids' mental health in my job and on young people with learning differences and those who are neurodiverse. I meet with kids who could not go to school when masks were mandated because of real physical sensitivities, others who don't attend now because there is no masking, many who don't mind either way, and some with learning differences that make it helpful to see mouths. And I would be absolutely terrible at my job if I invalidated any one of them. People told me I should come here tonight with stories. about the dying 4-year-old flown out of Hamilton because we had no room, Ottawa having to call in the Red Cross because there are too many sick kids, and that here in Hamilton we are not far behind of kids terrified, unable to breathe, of the antibiotics we're out of the pediatricians we don't have enough of, as family doctors and others are brought in to try and cover for them at McMaster. People thought I should make you feel moved with those stories to an aha moment. And those stories exist, and I think I could nail them. I've lost a child of my own, and I'm sure I could move you. But the story I think about is not those. The one that gets me where I feel is of trustees around tables hearing tearjerkers and the realities that no one is acting. But the thing in schools that we have right now is the immediate thing that will limit all that. We know many people cannot mask. And we know that by switching from opt-in to opt-out, we will hit the numbers we need. In other words, we know the only way to increase masking now is to at least have a requirement, sure, with big exceptions, where we say, hey, this will sound ridiculous, but you have to mask. It's literally required, unless you really can't. And get this, really don't want to, and even kind of don't want to, counts as can't, and you don't have to. And as wild as that sounds, we know it will increase our numbers. But you're not public health or the premier or prime minister, so why is it your decision, and why should you make it against them? I understand you're our only locally elected representatives focused specifically on kids and can stand up against provincial decisions you feel are not in students' best interests. But surely there are limits. Or will people next ask you to stir up support for kids' dental? Will we ask you to pop over to Mac and resuscitate some babies? But I think that you know that everyone else has passed this one along, and you, as I'm sure you have been before, are for this the last line of defense. And I honestly picture that nature show David Attenborough narrated elephant or whatever who turns back. With all the grown-up elephants running and the lion chasing and the elephant baby, we can't even watch, so we all turn away. But oh my God, that one turned around, and you can probably hear it say in elephant, are you kidding me, guys? And it points back, and it turns, and it goes back and helps, and it wins. And that goes through my head. And that might have been weird or dramatic, but I know what is not. That while you've adults you hear from, and high school students you hear from, whose representatives I defer to, and whose autonomy you have got to respect, along with the fact that they're probably smarter than us, who you don't hear from are the ones who can't stand here and speak. The kindergartners and grades 1, 2s and up, who are your students at school and at home and when scared at the hospital. Whose voices, along with those of all your students' future selves, especially now, are the voices you are supposed to be listening to. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Oliver. If you can stay at the podium, I'll just see if there are questions for clarification from trustees. Trustee DeHaab?
Thank you for your delegation. I do have a question. At some point, you mentioned that you said that masks are the only solution. Could you clarify that for me, please?
Yeah, the only immediate solution, we talked about, lobbying public health for things that will help long-term down the road that we have been terrible at, and it's come to this. But we hear about masks, vaccines, hand washing, and waiting. We're at peak hand washing. We can't up our hand washing game any further to make a difference in cases and transmission in the kids that are in danger. Waiting till Christmas or holidays, if anyone celebrates, sounds tempting, but things are only going to get worse and then devastatingly worse if we do that. And then vaccines, it would be sweet to protect everyone who wanted one with a vaccine, but I can tell you, and I'm hesitant to say this here, as someone who does vaccine clinics in Hamilton, the majority of the kids are now canceling because before they get to their vaccine, they are sick again, and they will cancel in the future when they're sick again. We're not going to, it's a sweet thing to say and to write, it's not going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for clarification? Trustee Tutt?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, Doctor, I want to thank you for your comments, and thank you for your service as well. And I'm sorry about your child and the children that you had unfortunate experiences with. I just wanted to confirm with you, so that I'm clear, is it your position that these numbers are only going to get worse if we don't intervene?
Thank you, Trustee. It is my position, but I say that with the caveat that lots of doctors have stood at these places for the last 3 years and said something with confidence. It's my position because the smart people I've spoken to, epidemiologists and disease modelers, this is their bread and butter, they are telling me that it's only going to get worse. And if I may add one thing to that, the messages I get from the folks who are too busy to be here and maybe are not comfortable speaking up, but mostly are just too busy, are that it is only getting worse.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Not seeing any further questions. Thank you so much for your delegation.
Thank you.
And sorry, the audience members don't get to ask questions. You're here to observe, okay? Thank you to our delegates who were able to speak tonight, but also thank you to all of our delegates who provided written delegations. At this time, I'm just going to look for a motion to receive all of the delegations, the oral and the written. Thank you, Trustee Tutt, seconded by Trustee Wong. Sorry, I've just got it all in favor. Thank you, and Trustee Archer. Trustee Archer, are you able to turn your camera on to vote? Or put your virtual hand up if you're having trouble? Okay, well, that does carry, and I don't have a vote from Trustee Archer. We'll move to item 4, which is approval of the agenda. So I'm looking for someone to move and second the agenda. Thank you, Trustee Tutt, seconded by Trustee White. Are there any comments or amendments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the agenda? Oh, approval of the agenda. Okay, thank you. That carries. And thank you, Trustee Archer. I see your virtual hand. Item 5 is declarations of conflict of interest. I haven't received any in writing. Are there any conflicts to declare tonight? No conflict? Okay, seeing none, thank you. We'll move to item 6, confirmation of the minutes from November 7th and 21st. Trustees will see that in their package. Are there any corrections to the minutes from September 7th and 21st? Oh, sorry, November. Jumping behind, November 7th and 21st. Trustee Tutt?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just looking at the minutes from the inaugural board meeting, I noticed that I don't think there actually was a vote to confirm the chair on that day. So I just wanted to correct the record and make the appropriate amendment to that.
I'm trying to recall. I was moving seats, so I think you're correct. Okay, and Trustee Officer Miller can double check that and correct the minutes. Thank you for that. Are there any other corrections? Okay, seeing none, we can move to item 8, which is appointment to trustee special committees. We have interest from one of our trustees to join the Human Resources Committee, and we have a vacancy on that committee. So I believe, oh, sorry, I'm skipping, pardon me. Let's do reports from trustee special committees first, and we have our audit committee report. Trustee Tutt, would you like to bring that forward?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Happy to bring forward the Audit Committee report for November 10 of this year. Colleagues will see there was one action item there and a number of monitoring items. So just to go through the action item there was a presentation of the consolidated financial statement of the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board for the year ending in August 31st of this year. Our external auditors from KPMG presented the consolidated financial statements. of the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board. They reported that, in their opinion, the consolidated financial statements present fairly in all material respects, and the financial position of the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board and the results of its operation are in accordance with the PSAB and GAAP, and the audit finding report was also presented. Trustee Buck was kind enough to move a motion that night and recommend that the 2021-2022 consolidated financial statement for the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board for the year ending August 31st, 2022 be forwarded to the Board of Trustees for approval, and that motion was unanimously carried. Moving along, colleagues, I'll draw your attention to the monitoring items. You'll see there, item B, the school board compliance report for the year 2021-2022 fiscal year was presented, and staff presented the report and noted that the school board was also compliant with all statutory regulations. Moving along to item C, an update on school board sector issues. Staff again presented and advised that a new Associate Director of Support Services will be starting on November 21st, 2022. Staff also provided an update on the board's 2021-22 EQAO assessment results. Staff will continue to focus on learning recovery and how best to utilize those resources. Staff also advised that the tutoring support grant for the Ministry of Education was extended to March of 2023. And staff provided an update on the CUPE labor action. And moving along to the last item, which is item D, you'll note there, colleagues, was an update from the Regional Internal Audit Team. Manager Eltherington provided terms of reference for staff utilization audit scheduled to commence in November of this year. So that is the update, Madam Chair. I respectfully submit that to this board. Thank you.
Thank you. A motion to approve the audit committee report from November 10th, 2022. Trustee Tutt?
Yes,
Yes,
thank you.
as there's an action item. Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Trustee Noble. Are there any questions or comments to the report? Trustee White?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious, with the consolidated financial statements, what is the deadline recommended by the ministry to submit the approval from the Board of Trustees?
I'll turn to the director.
Thanks for the question. Through the chair, I'll ask Associate Director Gerard to answer.
Thank you. Through the chair. Normally, in a normal year, financial statements would be due to the ministry on November 15th because of the election and the revised deadlines. New this election term, I believe they will be due this week. So this is our opportunity to approve and forward them on.
Any follow-up? If you could turn on your microphone. Thank you.
Thank you. I know this was an issue with our board for several years, and it's nice to hear that we had some revised deadlines, so that's good. But I know at one point our board was chronic in missing the deadline in non-election years, and we worked very hard to meet that November 15th deadline. So just pointing that out because in future years, I'm sure I'll say the same thing.
Thank you, Trustee White. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the audit committee report? Thank you. That carries. Just checking with Trustee Archer, if you're able to turn your camera on or use your virtual hand. Thank you, in favor. So that's unanimous. Okay. We'll move to item 8, appointment to trustee special committees. As I mentioned, there's interest in one of the spots that is open on Human Resources Committee. That's Vice Chair Miller. And I'll just check to see if there are any other interested trustees for the Human Resources Committee. Not seeing any, then I need a motion to appoint Vice Chair Miller to the Human Resources Committee. Thank you. I see Trustee Tutt and seconded by Trustee Wong. All in favor? Thank you. And just thank you, Trustee Archer. That is unanimous. Okay, we'll move along to reports from staff. Item 9 is our update on our masking motion, Resolution 22-160. I'm going to turn to the director and note that trustees did receive a copy copy of a presentation that you can use as reference. If you don't have your device with you, it might be difficult to see that on screen, but I believe we're going to try to share that. Over to you, Madam Director.
Thanks very much, and through the chair. This evening, we are pleased to provide trustees with a presentation as an update on the masking motion, Resolution 22-160, that was passed at the November 21st inaugural board meeting. I just want to begin with a reminder that as of March 21st, 2022, the province had announced the end of masking, requirement for masking in schools. When we opened our schools this September, we welcomed students and staff back to an environment that we called and deemed and promoted as mask-friendly. On November 21st, a motion was passed, and that motion read to ask all staff and students to wear a mask in all HWDSB facilities until further notice. So that motion represented an increase in the measures around masking. So this evening, the purpose of this presentation is to respond to trustees' questions from the November 21st meeting that staff was not prepared to answer at that time. So in terms of the presentation this evening, we are going to go over the questions that trustees had asked, and there are approximately 22 questions. We have grouped them thematically. And so we're going to begin with an overview of the pandemic timelines, and then we're going to do some updates about what's happened since that November 21st trustee motion and the communication that we've done around masking in schools. We will have some information from public health, as well as some attendance data, as well as some costing around masks, information around cleaning and ventilation, and then considerations to operationalize a mask mandate. So this evening, I'm joined by Superintendent of Student Achievement Sharon Stefanian, a superintendent on special assignment. We'll also hear from Superintendent of Human Resource Services Jamie Nunn, Associate Director Matthew Gerard, as Senior Manager of Facilities Management Dave Anderson. So that's who you're going to hear from in terms of this presentation. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Superintendent Stefanian. Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you, Director, and good evening. I'm just going to ask Chair Danko. I am managing the Teams view for those who are online. Can you see my slide deck?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. And thank you to Trustee Officer Miller for managing the PowerPoint in this space. We wanted to ensure everyone could see what we were referring to this evening. So we will click to the next slide. Perfect. So as our director had indicated, staff have been spending some time reviewing the various questions that trustees put on the table at the last meeting. There were a series of questions that spoke to health and safety measures that were in place during the pandemic. And specifically, there were some questions and comments around the measures that were in place during the highest peaks of COVID. So the next few slides walk through a little bit of a history with respect to COVID and the pandemic within Ontario, as well as within our local community and, of course, HWDSB. So March 12th, 2020 seems like a long time ago, but that was when the first communication from the Ministry of Education arrived in school boards regarding the pandemic. And many around this table may recall that that was the communication that extended the upcoming March break. As we moved almost a month later, April the 6th of 2020, that's when the Public Health Agency of Canada suggested that non-medical masks or face coverings could be worn as additional safety measures. And you may also recall that it was around this time there was a lot of apprehension around the use of face coverings or masks. And there was even thinking at the time that in some ways the wearing of face coverings and masks could be more harmful than good in those early stages back in 2020. Moving forward to June of 2020, that's when school boards were asked to begin to develop a plan to reopen schools for the 2021 school year, with a very strong emphasis in working with the local public health unit. And within that collaboration with the public health, consider the use of non-medical masks or face coverings when distancing is not possible. Also, the consideration of PPE for staff where necessary. We highlight this because in June of 2020, there was a strong emphasis from the ministry and from the province around school board and local public health unit collaboration in planning for the return to school. And within our community, many around the table would know that our work with our local public health unit actually began in February of 2020. Next slide. So previous slide, we were asked to begin planning in June, and then in July of 2020, a provincial guidance document became available to school boards. And that document, for those who may be interested in looking it up online, is the Provincial Guide to Reopening Ontario Schools. In that document, information was shared that non-medical masks would be mandatory for children and students in grades 4 to 12, with reasonable exceptions being in place. And masks at that point were recommended for children from kindergarten to grade 3. Staff, through that document, it was indicated staff would be required to wear medical masks and eye protection as well being available. In August of 2020, so the following month, having reviewed the guideline document and meeting with public health throughout that time frame, staff then began consultation with Hamilton Public Health around masking for grades kindergarten to grade 3. So keeping in mind, recommendation of the province at that point, but not a requirement. And in August of 2020, August the 24th to be exact, the Board of Trustees passed a resolution, and the resolution is on the slide in blue, that students in kindergarten to grade 3 be required to wear masks. And that was a resolution that was passed and in alignment with the Guide to Reopening Schools. In January 2021, provincial guidance making masking mandatory for grade 1 to 3 while indoors and masking for kindergarten students as being encouraged was the next step in the provincial journey. Of course, as a result of the mandate in August of 2020, we already had that in place within our schools. Next slide. So bringing us to August of 2021, again, another guidance document released by the ministry to support school boards in collaboration with public health in planning for the opening of school for the 21-22 school year. That document is the Provincial COVID-19 Health, Safety, and Operational Guidance for Schools. In this document, it spoke to mandatory masking for grades 1 to 12, and that local health units and school boards may implement additional masking measures based upon local circumstances. There was room within the guidance documents for the local public health unit, depending upon circumstances within a community, to make specific recommendations that went beyond what was in those guidance documents at that time. August 2021, the Reopening Ontario Act required boards to follow ministry direction and continue to emphasize the important role of the local public health unit. Also in August 2021, Hamilton Public Health strongly encouraged boards to have masking for JK and SK in place. Again, speaking to the ability for local public health units to make recommendations within their community and their region in order to respond to what is being seen within the community. Next slide. So that brings us to February 2022. Ministry of Education memo reminds school boards around the advice that may come forward from the local public health unit. And in March of 2022, there was a shift from a regional approach to moving away from what was happening in local communities to more of a provincial report. So the Reopening Ontario Act spoke to the fact that schools must continue to follow the recommendations of the Ministry of Education, but signaled the lifting of many of the measures that would be in schools. What we also saw at that time is the third piece, that local public health officials could no longer issue any new advice, recommendations, or instructions to businesses and organizations that were open after the Act in February of 2022. So where public health during the height of COVID and the high stages of the pandemic was in a position where they could respond to what was happening locally, in March of 2022, that ability to do that moved away from local public health units and moved back to being provincial. And on March the 9th, the province announced the end of masking in schools, beginning on March the 21st of 2022. Next slide. So that brings us to a number of resolutions that were approved by the Board of Trustees. So on March the 10th, there was a resolution that a mask mandate be put in place for grades 4 to 12, as well as staff, until April the 15th of 2022. Keep in mind that in terms of the timelines, March the 21st was when the masking mandate was going to be lifted across the province. On March the 15th, there was a resolution. The trustees approved that the motion from March the 10th, the one that's the top on the screen, that the mask mandate be put in place for grades 4 to 12 as well as staff until April the 15th, 2022 be rescinded. And on the same evening, there was a second motion that students in kindergarten to grade 3 be required to wear a mask also be rescinded. Next slide. And then on March the 15th, there was another resolution that evening approved by trustees that masks be required for all students and staff until April the 1st, or until a written ministry directive or policy is received that makes the motion out of order, whichever comes first. And then there was some further direction and guidance provided in the motion for staff. Next slide. And a reminder that in April of 2022, the remaining COVID regulations were revoked, and most recently, the resolution on November the 21st to ask students and staff to wear masks in all facilities until there is further direction. Next slide. So there were also a series of trustee questions around what has been happening in schools since the communication from local public health and specifically from Dr. Elizabeth Richardson, the medical officer of health, was shared with families on November the 16th. And also a question around what's been happening in schools since the director's message was shared around the trustee motion on November the 23rd. Trustees also asked about enhanced communication and awareness for families. And so our communications department has been reaching out via family messaging, staff messaging, websites, blog posts, social media, and other media over the weeks of November the 21st and November the 22nd to talk about mask awareness and also mask awareness and respiratory illness prevention. Next slide. So what's been happening in schools? We reached out to administrators to ask the question, since the two communications had gone home, what have you seen in terms of your observations around mask wearing in schools? So the data that you see on the slide reflects principal observations that since those two pieces of communication, about 45% of the administrators say that they're seeing about the same amount of mask wearing in schools. 52% say that mask wearing has increased a little. And then you can see has decreased, mask wearing decreasing a lot is at 2%, decreased a little at 1%, and has increased a lot is at 0. A few other anecdotal comments from administrators included that masks are generally more common in K to 3, and when staff are wearing masks, it's often very situational when a group of staff are working together. I will share with trustees that staff have noted that there has been an increase in requests from schools seeking masks for their schools for availability. Next slide. So again, there were a number of questions that were asked around previous procedures at the height of COVID. So this may look familiar, but during the early stages of the pandemic, when it comes to infection prevention and control, our approach, an approach that was advised by public health, was that of one that is multi-layered. Multi-layered and included a number of different aspects. So again, many around the room will recall the personal measures that we spoke about at the time. The importance of screening daily. If you're unwell, stay home. Wear a mask if you can wear a mask. Practice hand hygiene. Respiratory etiquette. Cough and sneeze into your elbow or your upper arm. Great emphasis on those personal, individualized measures, good practices for staying well during respiratory illness season. We also know at that time, and we're going to talk about the enhanced cleaning and ventilation a little later this evening, but there was enhanced cleaning in place in our schools. There were modifications made to ventilation, and we'll talk about those in a bit. You may also recall the signage, communication, and learning at that time. So when we reopened schools in September 2020 and again in September 2021, we spent time at the beginning of the school year reviewing with students all of those personal measures. Reviewing respiratory etiquette, reviewing the importance of washing your hands, reviewing how to wear a mask, and the importance of staying home if you're sick. There also was lots of signage in schools reminding students of all of these measures. There was supplies in classrooms and other locations for cleaning and disinfecting anything that was shared. So if students were tossing a ball, there was a process and a protocol in place around cleaning as you were passing the ball from person to person. Next slide. You may also recall the physical environment looked very different. There was lots of conversation about physical distancing. If students were using tables, there would have been plexiglass on the tables. Many tables were replaced with desks in rows. You will recall that washrooms had capacity limits, usage of every other stall, fountains were out of use, lockers were initially out of use. Students were in cohorts, minimal mixing of cohorts in secondary and no mixing of cohorts in elementary. Students had one group of peers that they stayed together with. There was no visitors to the school. There were no face-to-face meetings for parents, no face-to-face meetings for school councils. There were no volunteers coming into the schools. Schools looked and felt very, very different. Spaces within the schools were also used in a very different way. Shared materials, library books as an example, limited sharing of those types of resources and space between when classes were using them. And there were limitations on program. There were no assemblies, no graduation, no group work, mixing of cohorts such as reading buddy programs. Those things weren't happening in schools. And there was also a very prescribed process if there was a cohort that was going to be dismissed because of positive COVID cases. And we share that as a reminder of the many, many layers that were in place in schools during the height of COVID. Next slide. So public health expertise, we're just going to share with you some information from our local public health unit. The quotation on the slide is from Dr. Richardson, our local Chief Medical Officer of Health. Strongly recommending all community members, including parents and their children, wear a well-fitted mask indoors, especially when it's crowded. Local mandates can be useful where there are specific and unique local factors that need to be addressed. But the pandemic has shown consistent recommendations across regions are more effective. speaking to the importance of things happening not only in a single space, but actually happening in a broader community space. Next slide. Other key public health measures, I won't spend too much time on this slide, but again, reminder to keep up with your vaccines. Take protective measures to reduce serious consequences. Wear mask indoors or when you're unable to physically distance. Stay home if you're unwell, and talk to your healthcare provider if necessary. Next slide. At the last meeting, there were some questions that surfaced around vaccines and questions around whether we could look at vaccine clinics being held in schools, as was part of the process in during the pandemic. So the focus for public health right now, in terms of their school-based vaccine clinics, is for catch-up for those vaccines that students missed during the pandemic. The focus in primary is for grades 7 and 8 and the grade 8 catch-up. They're also holding clinics in secondary schools, trying to help students who would have been in grade 7, who are now in grade 9 and grade 10, get caught up on their vaccines. And that process will continue through to the spring of this year. Public health is encouraging individuals who'd like to access a vaccine to continue to do that through family doctors, primary care, through pharmacy, also various public health clinics. Next slide. There is a clinic at Lime Ridge Mall specifically for the COVID vaccine, which is closing later this month, but there will be mobile clinics available in neighborhoods, and public health is focusing on those communities in which there has been a lower uptake of vaccines so that the vaccine can be more accessible. We continue to collaborate with public health and are working with them on other ways that we can enhance communication to ensure students and families are aware of those opportunities if they so choose. Next slide. So we had some questions around attendance and what did student and staff attendance look like both during the pandemic, in the time frame in which the trustees approved the mandate in March of 2022 to April of 2022. There were also some questions around attendance in the beginning of the 22-23 school year. So we're going to start very global and talk about a couple of community-based indicators. These are not indicators for HWDSB schools or students, but then we're going to move into the more specific data with respect to students and with respect to staff. So I apologize if this graph is difficult to read, but this is a graph from our local public health unit, and it speaks to one of the new methods for measuring COVID within the community, and that is looking at the wastewater signal. Specifically, this particular data set looks at viral fragments that are found in wastewater. Now, when we're looking at this chart, it's intended to be used to look for trends. So it wouldn't be advised to pick a date such as January 2020 and compare it to January of 2021, because the use of this data is relatively new, and at this stage it's advised to be used just to look at the potential for trends. So why are we sharing this evening? So again, keeping in mind that this is community-based data and it's not specifically HWDSB data. And I apologize that I can't point to it on the screen. But you can see as we move past January 2022, you start to see a spike in the viral load or in the wastewater data. You will see an increase. And if you were to look at this chart and you were to zoom in on the public health website, what you'll see is that actually corresponds to the middle of March into April. And the peak is April the 19th. So what this data is telling us is that the wastewater was rising through March as we lifted protective measures within the school and also within the community. But wastewater peaked on April the 19th, and then we began to see the decline within the community. So again, this represents broader community, but gives you a bit of a sense of what we were seeing in terms of a trend around COVID at that time. Next slide. Also, global data for the community, again, not speaking specifically to HWDSB students or staff, but this graph speaks to hospital admissions, both the number of hospitalizations and the 7-day average within our community. Keep in mind that from the time an individual tests positive for COVID to the time they become symptomatic, to the time that they may become severely unwell and require hospitalization, there can be a lag in time. So when you look at this graph, what you'll see is that as measures were being removed in both March and April of 2022, you will notice that the hospitalizations peaked shortly thereafter in May. And if you compare that to the wastewater peaked in April, a little bit of a lag, hospitalizations peaked in May, and then we start to see that gradual decline in hospitalizations. And if you look at the far end of the graph, you can see how hospitalizations, although recognizing the pressures, they are trending downward as a community. And I'd now like to turn things over to my colleague, Superintendent Nunn. Next slide.
Thank you, Superintendent.
We'll talk about staff.
Thank you, Superintendent Stefani, and through you, Chair. Bringing forward tonight a data snapshot for trustees as a follow-up to questions from our inaugural board meeting in regards to staff absences between February and April of this year, and then taking a look at what we're currently experiencing right now since the start of September. Trustees will note we've provided this evening a chart that shows the average number of sick days that were utilized by staff during a 2-month period of time. Trustees will note that absences trended upwards in the month of March and peaked at the same week HWDSB did not require staff and students to wear a mask. We do not necessarily see a correlation between staff COVID absences and mask wearing by staff and students in the month of March and April. When we review our data, most of our sick day utilization during this time frame was because staff recorded a personal illness, and that the actual COVID, by way of staff respectively failing the COVID screening, was actually a small portion of the total number of personal illness absences that were recorded within this time frame. We did follow up with the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board. We learned that they did not have the data necessary to determine the outcome of their mandate and the impact, and the board shared that there was too many uncontrolled variables related to staff absences that they could not necessarily draw a conclusion. I'll bring trustees to the next slide. Taking a look at...
And I'll just remind our gallery, you've been very good. I know it's a long presentation, but really try to keep the whispering to a minimum.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, we also followed up with our coterminous board, and we had no data available from our coterminous board to share with the trustees this evening. Moving to the next slide in regards to our staff absence data currently, when we draw a comparison of 2021 to 2022, and we compare September 1st through to November 18th, comparing the 2 years, we have experienced an increase in employees recording personal illnesses when we compare last year to this year within the same time frame. From September 1st to November 18th, 2021, our average staff recorded 3.53 personal illness days, in comparison to September 1st to November 18th, 2022, where staff have recorded 3.95 personal illness days, or an increase of 0.42 personal illness days. We will note for trustees this evening, in working with our staff, we will note by way of data utilization for personal illness, we are seeing staff are experiencing a rise in utilizing short-term disability due to medical procedures that have been rescheduled as a result of the pandemic. Staff are also experiencing a delay in our healthcare system due to access to treatment for emotional and physical health conditions. And also our staff who have pre-existing health conditions have found that it's been exacerbated due to the pandemic, causing an increase in the utilization of personal illness. I'll turn to Associate Director Gerard.
Thank you, and thank you, and through you, Chair. If we can go to the next slide, please. So on this slide, we'll look at student absences, and what we see on the y-axis is a percentage of daily absences amongst our student population, which is approximately 51,500 approximately. On the x-axis, we have dates. The cutoff dates are basically April 15th to the 22nd and then to the 29th. Dates of note, just as you contextualize this, March 4th would have been a professional activity day. March 14th through the 18th would have been March break, and April 15th, Good Friday, April 18th, Easter Monday. I will offer that when we look at the data, keep in mind there's a delay between contracting COVID and becoming symptomatic or ill from COVID. Student absences were rising when staff and students were required to wear masks in March and into April. We saw a peak in student absences 1 week after masks no longer required at school. April 1st was the last day that masks were required. However, it would be hard for us to establish a direct relationship between mask wearing at HWDSB and student absences in March and April. If I can get the next slide, please. Again, just looking at this in a different manner, these are the average number of days absent. You have a comparison between the 2021 kind of fall time and the 2022 fall time. Again, note the differences there, some greater amount of difference in November, but fairly consistent year over year, September and October. Go on to the next slide. This is where I'd like to talk about masking inventory and costing. Just to build to some of the comments on the slide. Currently, every school does have a supply of disposable disposable medical masks, non-fitted N95 masks, cleaning supplies such as wipes, disinfectants, rapid antigen test kits. All of those are readily available at each of our schools. If we were to look at a requirement to provide additional masks to schools for the period of December to June, we've developed a costing that you'll see kind of in that last cluster of bullet points at the bottom of the slide. So taking into account kind of a standard offering of 2 masks per day per student and staff, you'll see the costing approximately at $500,000 per month, and it spans out to, or extrapolates to $3.5 million to get us to June 30th, 2023. I'd offer that the values that you see in front of you are based on our procurement through those policies and procedures established not only by this board, but the ministry and other legislative sources as well. It is important to note that up to this point, the Ministry of Government Consumer Services and Supply Ontario have provided us with masking, and throughout the pandemic, that relationship has changed, but most recently, they've been providing that masking to us without direct charge, I'll offer, although we do recognize it on our financial statements. It is unclear whether or not that relationship continues in that way, shape, or form if our demand increases, as indicated on the slides here. So with that, I will transition over to Dave Anderson, our Senior Manager of Facilities Management.
Thank you very much, and through the chair, happy to just bring back some reminders in terms of our enhanced cleaning. So in 2020, 2021, folks will remember that we received Ministry of Education dedicated funding for 22 full-time equivalent FTE custodial team members. Those members supported our enhanced cleaning efforts throughout the system. We also had our existing staff redeployed during that time, so secondary were in a bit of a hybrid model, as well as redeploying some of our afternoon staff from larger elementary schools into our smaller elementary schools to support that enhanced cleaning. In addition, we also at that time had a pause on community use of schools, which also freed up caretaking resources to assist during the daytime. 21-22 again saw the Ministry of Education providing that dedicated funding for the 22 FTE custodial teams to support our enhanced cleaning. And we typically focused on the elementary panel at this time with the 22 FTE. Going forward to 22-23, we now have 5 FTE custodial team members supporting enhanced cleaning, and that is at the secondary panel. This is through a Ministry of Education provided funding, but it is discretionary and up to the board on how we use those funds. So the deployment now currently is at the secondary panel again and focusing on touch points and tables and that sort of thing as we move forward. Next slide, please. So we see just a recap of what's been going on. This was the pandemic response for ventilation and continues today. So we have a number of projects that were initiated through specific COVID resilience infrastructure stream funding, and those projects were completed, and there's updates provided on the public-facing website through the ventilation link. We continue to complete air flushing with our mechanically ventilated systems. So that's running systems 2 hours before there's building occupants and 2 hours after. And then, of course, those systems do run throughout the day. Those HVAC systems do have regular filter changes. This is similar to your filter at home. This isn't the HEPA filters I'm speaking of, but the MERV 13 or MERV 10 filters. Those filters are changed regularly by our QP partners. And then, in addition, we continue to do and perform regular repairs and maintenance on our ventilation systems. Lastly is the HEPA filters that are in place per the Ministry of Education direction. So all kindergarten spaces is where we initiated. Schools without mechanical ventilation, so Tier 3 as defined by the ministry. Those classrooms and learning spaces all have HEPA units within them. Any active projects that we have underway that weren't yet completed and impacting our ventilation systems, we would provide HEPA units. And then through the deployment of these units, we did have somewhat of a surplus received from the ministry, so we then decided that we would provide them in gymnasium, special education rooms, cafeterias, and portables. And with that, I will turn to the director.
Thanks very much. And we wanted to share some information, some recent information from public health. I did, through the chair, just to let trustees know that I did invite public health to come and be here this evening. Unfortunately, they were not able to attend, but I was able to have an extensive conversation with Dr. Bart Harvey, the Associate Medical Officer of Health for Hamilton. And so this information is from them, and this is information from 1 week ago today. This is Hamilton Public Health Services Respiratory Diseases Update to the Board of Health. And when you look at the information, they are currently indicating that local COVID activity is moderate and decreasing. Local influenza activity is moderate and stable. Further information is regarding new cases of COVID, which they say are decreasing over the last 7 days. New cases are decreasing in all of the categories. Over the past 3 weeks, the 7-day average of hospitalizations is decreasing. Over the past 3 weeks, the weekly incidence per 100,000 of new cases has decreased, as well as the 7-day average of new cases. Public Health also provided this information for us to show ICU admissions. Again, just a reminder that this information is quite recent. This is from 5 days ago. That they are stable over the past 3 weeks. The 7-day average for ICU admissions, stable in terms of wastewater samples with COVID-19 detection. There's been a decrease in test positivity over the past 3 weeks and a decrease in active outbreaks. Again, that information is from the City of Hamilton COVID-19 dashboard, and that was taken on November the 30th. Some additional information in terms of new influenza cases. We are seeing an increase over the past 3 weeks. The 7-day average is increasing. Over the past 3 weeks, influenza test positivity has stabilized, while the number of active respiratory outbreaks remains stable. So among the questions trustees asked us to discuss and to go back and look into were considerations to operationalize a mask mandate. So listed there, you have a number of items that would need to be considered. The first among them, that there is a lack of a provincial mandate. In speaking with Dr. Harvey, he talked about the need for, as did Dr. Richardson, a regional or provincial approach, that a local approach might not be the most wise or effective. And so we currently don't have a provincial mandate or a mandate from the ministry around masks. In terms of human rights, we know that there are some who are unable to wear masks due to medical reasons or disability. We heard that wearing a mask could be a barrier to receiving service and that we would need to have exceptions. We wouldn't want anyone to experience harassment or discrimination, under our human rights code because they are wearing or not wearing a mask. And we would want exemptions provided so that everyone, would be able to wear or not without the need for documentation. In terms of public health expertise is something to consider. As I shared, Hamilton's Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Richardson, her message to families was around strongly recommending wearing masks in indoor settings. And Hamilton Public Health is following the Ontario Chief Medical Officer of Health's advice, which was around strongly recommending it for individuals in indoor settings. And I just want to, again, just remind us of the importance of having not just a HWDSB direction, but their preference, this is from public health, would be a provincial approach as COVID is across the province. Finally, the role of school-based staff in enforcing is an important consideration in terms of operationalizing a mandate. We know that it would be school leaders, school principals, vice principals, teachers who would need to enforce this. We know that this can be a divisive issue, and we wouldn't want to create a divide between those who are wearing masks and those who are not as well. Thinking about the time that would be required for staff to follow up or enforce is something that's really important that we do consider at this time when we are looking at focusing on learning recovery. The divide within the school and between the school and the community is a serious consideration. We want our schools to be inclusive, welcoming for all. As I said previously, at the beginning of the year, we had we were advertising mask-friendly spaces. And whatever decisions we make, I think we really need to focus on ensuring that our schools continue to be welcoming and inclusive spaces. I did touch briefly on an exemption process, that would need to be barrier-free, whether that were written or oral. I think we'd have to consider that we wouldn't want to make this onerous or cumbersome on families or students or staff. And in terms of cost, you heard from Associate Director Gerard what those costs were, and they were significant, so it is something to think about. Those costs were based on 2 masks per student and staff per day. And finally, as we close, this was a quote from the Ontario Science Advisory Table. That table was made up of 35 volunteer scientists and public health experts. And again, they reinforce pretty much what Dr. Richardson and Dr. Harvey have shared, which is the importance of how we make the decisions. Decisions should evaluate the benefits and harms of the measures and should be made in collaboration with the local health unit. and that implementation of these temporary measures in schools should not be done in isolation of community measures. In particular, mask mandates should align with community guidance for indoor spaces. I just want to repeat, especially for our audience who's in the gallery, that as staff, we're not making a presentation for or against masks. We're simply responding to the questions that were given to us at the last meeting. So that's all the information. We have tried to respond to all of the questions. We are very happy to answer any questions that trustees may have. Thank you.
Thank you. That was quite comprehensive and hopefully answered a lot of questions. What I'd like to do next is give everybody an opportunity to ask questions for clarification based on what was presented, recognizing that that was a lot of information. I recognize that people may wish to potentially put forward direction, but if you can hang on to that, and we'll do questions first. And I'm going to ask people to speak one time and try to limit that to about 5 minutes of your speaking time. Just so that we can progress through the meeting, but certainly we'll have a chance to discuss any potential motions if there's direction. I do see Trustee Noble, and if you'd like to be in the speakers list, I'll add you to the list.
I'm sorry?
Thank you, Chair. And may I just ask a quick clarification? How many questions are acceptable?
Number of questions is not an issue. It's more the time it takes you to ask them. So
Brilliant.
If you can make them brief, you can ask more questions.
Excellent. Thank you. I just wanted to ask one question to do with, were there any indications made to administrators when asking about mask wearing frequency in terms of framing the difference between about the same and slight increases? And I will direct that through the chair to perhaps Superintendent Nunn.
If you just direct it through the chair, I'll direct it to staff, to the director.
Thank you for the question. Through the chair, I'll ask Superintendent Stefanian to respond.
So thank you for the question. The data that was collected was completely observational data from the administrators. We did not provide them with a scale. We were interested in their observations post the two communications and their interpretation within their community, what looked like a lot, a little, or no change, or little change. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Noble?
Thank you so much. Yes, that's really helpful. I'm wondering where the 2 masks issued per person per day policy approach is coming from. Is it from a policy that we have, or is it a medical direction or ministry expectation? And through the chair.
Thank you. To the director?
Thank you for the question. I'll ask Associate Director Gerard to respond. Thank you.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, that's based on past experience and a model that was put together by the ministry, past practice.
Trustee Noble?
Brilliant. Thank you. And I guess I have one final question. I noticed throughout the presentation there's this pretty minimal reference to RSV. Of course, that's pretty recent, as well as long COVID, though there were a couple of mentions to short-term disability. I'm wondering if there was a lack of information available from HPH, Hamilton Public Health, to discuss these, or if those questions were omitted for the sake of brevity. Thank you.
Thank you. To the director?
Thanks very much for the question. I actually had quite an engaging conversation with Dr. Harvey about this, and what he shared is that RSV has been with us for quite some time, as has influenza, and that it's really only COVID-19 that he called new on the scene. And so the focus was really around COVID, because we had been living with and managing RSV and influenza for quite some time without mask mandates, and that's what he shared. Thank you.
Any other follow-up, Trustee Noble?
No, thank you.
Thank you. I have Trustee Mulholland next, and then Trustee DeHaab. Trustee Mulholland, no? You're good? So turn it to Trustee DeHaab.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that presentation. That was really helpful. I had a couple of questions. The public health data that you shared, was that indicative of all ages or specifically children?
To the director.
Thank you very much for the question. My assumption, though I'm not 100% positive, is that it encompasses everyone because it wasn't sorted by age. Thank you.
Trustee Dahab.
Thank you so much. I had another question about some of the considerations. There was a consideration around human rights specifically. So given that the OHRC has indicated that some sort of masking policy does not violate human rights, could you clarify what specifically that consideration was referring to?
To the director.
Thanks very much. In the absence of a provincial mandate or direction from the ministry, if we were to have a masking, if we were to require masking, that we would need to ensure that there was a process for families, students, and staff to seek exemptions, and that process not be cumbersome, and that it be barrier-free. So that is the human rights framing that I was thinking of. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Dahab.
Thank you so much. And that has always been the case with any resolutions that have been passed here, correct? That there have been low barrier or no exemptions?
To the director.
Through the chair, could I please get a clarification on the question? Is that specifically around masking?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, yes. To answer you, that was the case when the extension was passed last year, that it was a barrier-free exemption process.
Thank you. That's it for now.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Mulholland?
Madam Chair, it's been a long night, and these people sitting, we know very well that all that's going to happen is there's going to be a motion to mandate or not to mandate. So there's no questions to be asked here. It's been all presented. We've dealt with it for 3 or 4 meetings. So let's get on with it. And somebody put the motion and get on with it.
If we can keep our applause to a minimum, thank you, Trustee, but I would like to give people the opportunity for clarification, and we'll go to any potential motion. I do have Trustee White on the speakers list, and trustees can consider if they need to ask questions or not. But the hope was to facilitate a more efficient discussion by doing this. Trustee White?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one quick question through you to staff on the presentation. Page 921 and 922, just clarity on the student absence data. Between the 2 slides, there's kind of different kind of apples to apples, apples and oranges. So for instance, on 921, we see a daily absent rate of roughly, say, 12 that peaks around April 11th to 14th. On the next slide, we see a absent rate based on the student number of days per month, I believe. So they're it's different data. So can we translate that into what, for instance, what we see on slide 922 in terms of percentage or vice versa?
Thank you. To the director?
Thank you for the question. Through the chair, I'll ask Associate Director Gerard.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. So if we look at the first slide where we have the percentage, that's the percentage of students that are absent on a given day, and then this is the average number of absences in a month. It's based on the same data set. Yeah, so to translate it over, I'm not sure what I could offer to assist any further than that.
Trustee White?
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to draw from this, and I think it is important in understanding the effect on the classroom. This is why I'm asking. So on slide 922, we see from November 1st to November 18th, an average average days absent per month increased from 1.22 to 1.72, which is over a 50% increase. But like I said, trying to trying to understand that in the context of a previous year, that's difficult, or rather the previous year, say April when we did peak. So we're seeing a 50% increase in days absent, but do we know what that is in terms of an average daily absent rate?
To the Associate Director.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So we could extend the graph. I just don't have that with me right now. So the first graph that basically gives us a percentage of absences leads us up to a certain point. Again, it stops before we would hit September, October, November of this year. So I don't have that readily available.
Okay, and no follow-up. Okay, I'm not seeing any, Trustee Buck, go ahead.
Sorry about that, Chair Danko. I was just trying to make sense of all the notes I was taking. Thank you so much to everyone for the presentation tonight. I was encouraged by much of the data. It appears that without a provincially, a locally mandated masking, we are starting to see rates stabilize or decrease in many areas. So that was, to my way of thinking, encouraging. I had hoped to be able to compare our attendance rates with the coterminous board in that 2-week period following our extension. Of our extension and even beyond would have been great. But was there any reason we weren't able to receive that data? I was given by a community member what I hoped were accurate numbers, but I just assumed that those numbers are public knowledge.
Turn to Superintendent Nunn. Thank you.
Thank you, and through the chair, from our coterminous partner, they have no public-facing data to share with us.
Any follow-up, Trustee Buck?
Not on that question. Thank you to the superintendent for his work in trying to get those. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sense of my notes. So for me, much of the last 2 years, 2.5 years, we've needed to limit a lot of things, including our movement, our programming.
Can I just check in, Trustee Buck?
Yes, you may.
Are you going to be asking a question or making a statement? Because I'm wondering if you could reserve a statement for when we're debating something on the floor.
Yes, I can do that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Yes. Yes, I did have a question in terms of our ventilation. Is there anything over and above some Herculean thing that we could be doing in order to even improve our ventilation? So something like, is it reasonable to, for example, change our HEPA filters more frequently? Is there anything differently we could be doing there to make ventilation more robust?
Thank you. To the Director.
Thanks very much. I'll ask Senior Manager Anderson to respond.
Thank you for the question, and through the chair, the pieces that we have in place now are tied to the COVID response information that we've received from the ministry to date. In addition, we do go over and above and provide HEPA units in the spaces I identified earlier, such as gymnasiums or cafeterias. The question around changing HEPA filters more frequently, depending on the unit, we have a number of different manufactured units of HEPA filters. Those units were changed out throughout the summer and ready for September, and according to the manufacturer, are good for well over a year. So changing those filters wouldn't benefit or make it function any better. So I think to answer the question, we believe what we're doing now is in line with best practice.
Thank you. Trustee Buck.
Thank you very much. No further questions.
Thank you. I saw Trustee Wong.
Sorry, I just have a few questions. So one of my first questions is from slide, through the chair, for slide 910. I'm just wondering where this data came from, like what principles were asked, like was there certain regions were asked? It was very anecdotal. I'm just trying to understand like where that data from principals came from.
Thank you. To the Director.
Thanks very much. And just a reminder that after we after the motion was passed, we wanted to just get some anecdotal data, understanding that not a lot of time had passed, but we wanted to check in with our school leaders. So I'll turn it to Superintendent Stefanian to provide a little bit more context. Thank you.
So thank you, Director, and thank you for the question. As the Director indicated, after the motion was passed, we put together a very short survey that was emailed to our administrators and set the context for the two pieces of communication that had been shared with families, both the communication from Dr. Richardson, the letter from our director with respect to the motion, and then asked one question of our administrators with respect to their perceptions around mask usage in their schools since those communications had been shared.
Thank you. Follow up?
Thank you for that. Can I just fire off the questions? Keep going. So I want a little more clarification on slide 924 as well. So just recognizing that the original numbers during COVID for full-time equivalent custodial team members was at 22 people, and now we're down to 5. Just wondering if there's any room for improvement in this area, because that seems like a very drastic change. It's about 3/4, if I'm doing my math correctly. I'm just wondering why that number dropped so significantly, recognizing that I'm assuming that it has something to do with the Ministry of Education not having that dedicated funding to enhanced cleaning, but recognizing that enhanced cleaning is a large part about how we reduce sickness within classrooms. So just wondering why it dropped so drastically. I would be a little less surprised to see maybe a drop of half, but this seems like a pretty big drop from 22 to 5.
Thank you. To the director?
Thanks very much for the question, and I'll ask Senior Manager Dave Anderson to respond. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and through the chair, since we did receive the specific funding for the 22 FTE, things have changed significantly in the way we use our spaces. We now have community use of schools. We now have cafeteria services. The schools are much different, and things are progressing. So when we had those 22 FTEs, those were full-time equivalent. It turned into approximately 40 individuals that were assigned. They were, again, pulled from our afternoon staff or our larger schools, our larger elementary staff. And as the funding models changed and the direction from public health was modified based on how we were using our spaces, we modified the FTE complement accordingly, and now just focus on the secondary panel, as the elementary panel does have those touch points, washrooms, et cetera, disinfected in line with the expectations from public health.
Thank you. Trustee Wong?
Thank you for that clarification. I just have one last question for staff. Just trying to understand, I think this is also, it's on slide 923. Just wanting to get a bit of more clarification on what does supply mean within a school, because does supply mean that these masks are available at the front office? Are they available in all classrooms? Where are the supplies, where are all these supplies in classrooms or in schools?
Thank you. To the director?
Thanks very much for the question. The intention is that the supply are, because we're talking specifically about masks, that they're in common areas, that they're available in front office, they're available in classrooms, they're available in common areas such as staff rooms. That is what we mean by available. Thank you.
Any follow-up?
Nope, that clarifies my question. Thank you.
Thank you. So at this time, we've had our discussion and had the presentation. If there was anything someone wanted to, sorry, did you have a question or?
Yes, I have a question, Madam Chair.
Trustee, I'll go to Trustee Tett for his question, and then I saw Trustee Noble.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll keep my remarks quite focused. I appreciate the opportunity to ask staff for the question, and thank you for the presentation that you guys have all given. Just very quickly, slide 920, I believe. It says absence code ended August 2022. Did public health provide any information on what that means?
To the director.
Thanks very much for the question. I would ask Superintendent Jamie Nunn to respond.
Thank you, and through the chair. In the 2021-2022 school year, as it was mandatory up until March of 2022 for all staff to complete the daily screener, we created a separate COVID-related absence code for a staff member who had COVID-related symptoms or a family member or someone within their household who did. Given the change in the regulation at the end of August in our return to school, that COVID-related code was no longer required as it was voluntary for staff to complete the self-screen on a daily basis. So staff who are, we do not use a COVID-related code now in this school year.
Thank you. Trustee Todd?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to follow up on that point, so through the chair again, so if we look at slide 919, and we see a couple of baselines there between COVID-19 absences and total sick days. If we're not capturing, or the COVID absence signal was not being utilized after August, chances are the numbers aren't being accurately captured by staff because maybe staff wasn't disclosing the COVID absence and we're not collecting the data either. Is that a possibility there that may have factored into some of these numbers? Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Trustee Tutt, can you just clarify if you mean overall staff absence numbers?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. To the director?
Thanks very much for the question. Superintendent Jamie Nunn.
Thank you for the question, and through the chair. So a staff member who currently in this school year who has COVID-related symptoms would enter a personal illness code and be absent from work. So we do not have the data accessible in terms of determining staff who are absent for personal illness relative to staff who have a COVID-19 related illness. All illnesses are recorded as personal illness.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Trustee Tutt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So through you again, just to confirm, so all illnesses would be captured as just all illness. There's no way to distinguish COVID-related illnesses. We're not doing that right now. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that is correct. There is not a special code that we use anymore at this time in the pandemic to note that it is related to COVID. So all illnesses, all absences are captured together. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And then just to follow up on slide 917, and I appreciate you guys were trying to present some information from public health. I really appreciate that. It's probably not the easiest thing to do. But at 917, the wastewater signal data, I know Superintendent Stepanian had mentioned the peak in April, or May, was it? But I noticed on that slide, there was also a peak in January. Is it safe to assume, through you, Madam Chair, that peak is happening after the holiday season around that time? That's why we're seeing a spike there as well? Thank you.
To the director?
Through the chair, that is accurate. That's the information that we have as well. Thank you.
Trustee Tutt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And then my next question is over to my friend over at Facilities Management. Actually, I could open it up to the director as well. Just to go back, and I know there was a comment made around the HEPA filters. And so what exactly is the procedure through the chair with regards to capturing the maintenance and regular checkups on those HEPA filters? Thank you.
Through the director to Senior Manager Anderson.
Thank you. Through the chair, I just want to add something to my last response to Trustee Tutt, which is just a reminder that date that you indicated, January 2021, I believe, was a shutdown. It was both 2022, sorry. It was both after the holidays, and because of that, there was an extended period of time in which we were shut down. To your current question, I'd ask Senior Manager Dave Anderson to respond. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. All of our HEPA units, our complete inventory, are logged in our eBay system. And we track when we replace those filters, how they're being replaced, and we also monitor throughout the school year to ensure that those filters are not requiring replacement. Through the chair.
Thank you, Trustee Tutt.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that information. And my last question, Madam Chair, if I may, through you, slide, I think, 9 to 27. I know that some language has been used by public health with regards to numbers potentially being stable. Just in your conversations with public health, through you, Madam Chair, anyone mention why there's such a disconnect between making that type of conclusion that public health is making and the reality that's on the ground? Because we heard from a doctor tonight that the ICUs are packed. You can pick up a media report of the last couple of months, medical staff pleading, saying they're being overrun. Numbers are, pick your adjective, like the numbers are ballooning. So was there any information shared with our staff with regards to why there's that disconnect? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I'll just remind the gallery, you're doing a great job, but if we can keep the mutters to a minimum, and I'll turn to the director.
Thanks very much for the question. The extended conversation I had with Dr. Harvey was on December the 1st, so just 4 days ago, pardon me. And at that time, he talked about the ICU at McMaster being at 100%, acute care at 110%, but that they were falling, and that the data that we had was actually 2 weeks out of date, and that they were on a decline. So that was the information that was shared with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Trustee Todd?
Those are my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I didn't see any other hands for questions. So Trustee Noble, go ahead.
Thank you. I'd love to move a motion to sort of conclude some of this discussion, maybe engage in some further discussion related to a particular motion. Is that in order? Sure. Maybe I should just speak closer. Yeah, I was wondering if I could move a motion, if that would be in order to carry on to another part of this discussion.
If you wish to move a motion, this would be the time to do it.
Brilliant. So I guess moved by Noble. And there is an effective date, effective December 12th. So that would be soon. That the HWDSB, and I will send this to Heather for reference, as well as all trustees, that the HWDSB adopt a temporary universal masking standard, such that all staff and students in all HWDSB buildings.
Please, just sorry to interrupt. Can I remind the gallery to please be respectful and quiet so we can hear the trustee? I understand feelings might be strong on this, but you're here as observers, and I don't want to have to ask people to leave. Sorry, go ahead, Trustee Noble.
Thank you. That all staff and students in all HWDSB buildings and in all HWDSB-led activities held indoors be expected to wear a medical mask or better unless they provide evidence of their individual opt-out. Exemptions shall be offered such that, this is a continuation, exemptions shall be offered for all staff and students in circumstances such as nutritional breaks, musical/performing arts instruction, or sports in which masks cannot be worn, and cases of written medical exemptions on the basis of documented disability, as well as such that individual opt-outs be made available to all staff and students where an individual consent or student assent, along with the provision of any reason, shall constitute grounds for exemption, wherein consequences for violations of this standard shall require a written explanation for not participating in the opt-out process. During such time, medical masks will be made available, visible and available for use by all staff and students, and the universal masking standard will remain in place until such time as Public Health Ontario and Hamilton Public Health no longer strongly recommend the public wear a mask to protect against exposure to airborne and respiratory viruses in indoor spaces.
Thank you. So if we could get that in writing, I think we need to make sure that that is shared with all trustees before we go to any kind of debate. Have you sent it to Trustee Officer Miller? Thank you. Is it possible to put it on screen, or because most trustees don't have devices? So can you send exactly what you said? Because Trustee Officer Miller has something that's a little bit different.
In that case, I can reread based off of what was sent. If there's a small modification. I think there might be a small retraction in the sense of mask visibility and availability. In which case, if I could withdraw that comment as part of it.
Okay, so we do just need that. Can we maybe take a 5-minute recess so that
Sure.
everyone can get a bio break,
Yeah.
including our patient audience? We'll get that written down so that trustees all have it in front of them. We can print it out, and then we'll come back to see if there's a seconder and have a possible debate. So I'll just, if I could move a 5-minute recess, I need a seconder for that. Thank you, Trustee Tutt. And all in favor? Thank you. I think with Trustee Mulholland voting against. So we'll be back at 9:25.
I'm just asking. He doesn't want to talk to you about that. He's going to stand here like that, but then he doesn't want to talk.
She's filming someone.
I have nothing.
Not you.
Okay.
You can come if you want.
No, I'm asking you what school your kids are in. That's the question.
Your video.
Like what public schools your kids are in.
He doesn't have kids.
Do you have kids or are you just actors here? Simple question. Do you have children or are you just actors here tonight? I'm just asking if they're like the actors or the actual children. Like simple question. All of these people.
We know that studies for the last 5 years.
So do you have children? Are you representing the kids?
You guys either have to take your seat.
We're getting surrounded.
You don't. Look.
You guys are going to have to either take your seat or leave the gallery. Good, then take a seat, please. No, you can either take your seat or leave the gallery. I'm not chatting with you. Okay? Choice of two things, man.
I'm just standing here for the recess. Right?
Okay? Take a seat, sir, or leave the gallery. Two choices.
So the fact to not zoom in and live stream random trustees. They're recording and live streaming random trustee conversations. That's why we sit in front of them. It's disrespecting their privacy.
Want it emailed or do you want it?
I'm just going to ask people to take their seats, please. We're about ready to restart if you're choosing to stay. Thank you. It'll just be a moment. Okay, I'll invite everyone to return to their seats. Okay, I'm just waiting for, we have quorum to restart, but I'm just waiting. I would like everyone to be able to join us at the table. I just note that I think there's been a bit of a changeover in some of the gallery members as seats became available. So I just want to remind you of our norms and expectations for everyone in the room. And that is that everyone abides by our HWDSB code of conduct. And in a nutshell, that is to treat everyone with dignity and respect at all times, especially when there is disagreement. That's written right into the code of conduct. So I'll just remind everyone to keep applause or yelling to, applause to a minimum. Please do not yell out or disrupt the meeting. If I have to, I will ask you to leave, and we've done really well tonight, so I'd hope we don't have to go there. And we do appreciate your patience. I know we had some technical delays getting started. Okay, I see people returning to the table, so we'll call the meeting back to order. And we have a motion that's been shared with trustees. We're getting that put on screen. Just for the sake of, I'll read it out and everybody can read along with me. That effective December 12th, 2022, HWDSB adopt a temporary universal masking standard such that all staff and students in all HWDSB buildings and in all HWDSB-led activities held indoors be expected to wear a medical mask or better unless they provide evidence of their individual opt-out. Exemptions shall be offered for all staff and students in circumstances such as nutritional breaks, musical arts, performing arts instruction, or sports in which masks cannot be worn, and cases of written medical exemptions on the basis of documented disability. Individual opt-outs will be made available to all staff and students where an individual consent or student assent, along with provision of any reason, shall constitute grounds for exemption. If I can just ask people to quiet down in the gallery, or I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Thank you. Consequences for violations of this standard shall require an explanation for not participating in the opt-out process, and the universal masking standard remain in place until such time as Public Health Ontario and Hamilton Public Health no longer strongly recommend the public wear a mask to protect against exposure to airborne and respiratory viruses in indoor spaces. So that is the motion before us, moved by Trustee Noble. I would need a seconder to get that on the table. Seconded by Trustee Tutt. Okay, I'll turn to the mover. You get to provide remarks for up to 5 minutes. I will come back to you for closing remarks at the end of the debate. And I'll just remind everyone that you get to speak one time for up to 5 minutes. And hopefully with many of the questions that have been, or the information presented and questions answered, there won't be too many questions. So I'll turn it over to Trustee Noble to get us started.
Brilliant, thank you. So I want to start by issuing a huge thanks to everyone who has submitted an email or a delegation or come to this event tonight. I think there's a lot of bravery that has been exhibited in even just sharing one's opinion in an environment that is polarized. So I want to share my appreciation for that. So since our last meeting 2 weeks ago, I'd say I've spent personally anywhere from 50 to 60 hours consulting, researching, and meeting with not just community members, reading emails, and responding to folks who I generally disagree with in many respects. And I learned a lot. And generally speaking, I would say that I would consider the motion before us insufficient for the current situation that we're dealing with to do with healthcare institutions. However, I recognize that this is not about me. This is why I've really valued the conversations that I've had with about 8 different trustees. I wish I could get to everyone, but unfortunately, there's only so much time in a day. And I feel like the wording that has been used here, expectation, an opt-out, and universal masking standard rather than a mandate of any kind, because I think as we can all appreciate, mandatory is not with exemptions. That has led to the policy that we see today. I recognize that it is long, but that is because there were a lot of questions and considerations that folks had at our last meeting and in between, and I wanted to make sure that I was addressing them as best as possible. So I will leave it there.
Thank you, Trustee Noble. Trustee Tutt, as a seconder, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and just taking into consideration, I'm just seeing the motion right now for the first time, and reading through it, I feel that it kind of captures all aspects of what we're trying to do in terms of trying to protect students in our system, trying to protect staff. Oh, and we're losing the lights.
Just dramatic effect for you, Paul.
Oh, there you go. All right.
It's just adding to the feel for the evening.
Well, we just added some drama to that.
Carry on, Trustee Tutt.
Thank you. So I think it will help staff protect our students on school property. I think it protects our staff. I think it protects our school administrators, who often sometimes get left out and we don't acknowledge the hard and good work that they do day in, day out. I think it protects our families. This is all an obligation that rests upon us, and we've heard tonight, you know, the provincial government's made it clear they're not going to act. And public health isn't acting either, other than providing some data. We have a local need. We've got a healthcare system in crisis. No bones about it. And you know what? Yeah, we do need more resources. I don't think there's anybody else here that'll disagree that there's not more resources needed. But unfortunately, we don't have that right now. What we do have is what's in our control, and we could try to mitigate what's happening in our hospitals, in our ICUs, in our local communities. We've talked at this table how it's important for schools to always remain open, and for our children to be in those classes with their teachers. And what we see time and time again is students are getting sick. Teachers are getting sick. We just heard tonight that we're not even tracking the actual absences with regards to COVID as it relates to staff, because we don't use that code anymore. So we've heard a doctor tonight who I'm fortunate enough, I have 2 little kids. I haven't lost a child. He didn't have to share that information tonight about him losing a child or losing patients. But I sit there and I think, if we just did just a little something to help him and his colleagues that are on the front line, if we showed a little bit of courage, what difference could that make? Right? What difference could that make?
To the gallery, please, can I remind you that you're here as observers, and if you're going to speak, I'm going to have to, I'm sorry, I've given you a warning. I'm going to ask you to leave the room. Do we have security? I'm going to need you to leave the room. I appreciate that, please. We do need to continue with our meeting, so if we could please leave the room, thank you. Thank you. I will also ask you to leave the room. Thank you. Off you go. And of course, so people are welcome to view downstairs on the online viewing gallery. We do need to proceed with our meeting in order to come to a conclusion. And so I hope that people that are staying can be respectful. And I appreciate it's hard to be observers and emotions may be high, but if you can please try to just be respectful and allow us to proceed with the meeting. Trustee Tutt, lost track of your time, but you may continue.
Can I reclaim some of my time, Madam Chair? And like I said, I don't have too much more to say, but what I will say is this. You know, it's all fine when it's not your kid going to the emergency room, all right? Or ending, God forbid, ending up in the ICU. It's all fine. But until your child is there, right, you get a different viewpoint of things.
Trustee Todd, I recommend maybe
Sorry,
you
Madam
speak to the
Chair,
chair.
I'll put it through you. I was just turning
Again,
that
to the
way.
gallery, I'd really not like to clear the gallery, but I will have to do that if it interferes with our meeting. So please, if you can listen, thank you. As the gallery, you're here as observers, not participants in the meeting. So thank you.
I will keep talking because that's our job.
Okay, please,
Sorry,
Trustee
Madam
Todd,
Chair.
don't engage the gallery.
All right. So, if I can reclaim some of my time. I think for us to, look, we've done this before. Recently, we stepped up and we were able to protect our school community. So we know we've done this before. If we're going to turn around and make any type of argument and say that our staff can't operationalize this, well, we know that's not true. We can. Right? We have a skilled staff, and I think that would be selling them short. So I'm going to implore upon my colleagues to support this motion. There's exemptions clearly stated in there. The language is.
Please, I've warned you twice. I'm going to have to ask you to step out of the room. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. If you could please step out of the room. Thank you. Thank you. If you could please step out of the room. Thank you. Trustee Tuck, would you like to wrap up your remarks?
Thank you. So I think the language is flexible enough, and I credit my colleague for making the pivot and streamlining this language. I don't see anything in here that bars our staff from being able to operationalize this or, cause an undue burden or any type of additional burden on our school community. Thank you, Madam Chair. So for that reason, I ask my colleagues to support this motion tonight, and I'm happy to second it. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Tutt. Do I have any other speakers to the motion? Trustee Dahab?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to point my colleagues to page F7. There is information about a published report in the New England Journal of Medicine from November of this year that highlights a direct correlation between masking and between lower transmission rates of respiratory viruses, including COVID. I think that I would just like to say my thanks to Trustee Noble for putting this motion forward. I think that as a school board, we do have a responsibility to promote student well-being and achievement, and I think that passing this motion today is a step in the right direction. We're in the middle of a pediatric health crisis, and this as a temporary measure until the pressure off of the healthcare sector is lifted, I think, is us doing our due diligence as leaders in the education sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Dahab. Are there any further speakers to the motion? I see Student Trustee Lee, followed by Student Trustee Mahmood. Go ahead.
Sorry. Thank you, and through the chair, I would just like to bring a few concerns and just highlight student opinion to this table. So the general sentiment is that students struggled during the pandemic and are tired of mandates, and they don't really want to experience this again. However, we do need to acknowledge that our younger and immunocompromised students have been disproportionately affected and are more vulnerable to the transmission of COVID, flu, and RSV. So I just want to kind of reflect on a request to staff and students last week. Did notice that not only were students confused by the communication, there was also no significant increase in masking amongst my peers. So this indicates the following, that students are not too eager to mask, right? And if our goal is to increase masking, the mandate has to be effective, and we need the support from students as well. So we need to be working in cooperation with staff, students, parents, everyone in the community. On the other hand, I do want to remind everyone that our overarching goal is to ensure that students are learning in a safe and comfortable environment. So elementary and secondary students have expressed that they're unsure on how feasible a mandate would be at this point. They have provided a bunch of alternatives, instead, this includes including awareness, increasing sanitation. The general sentiment is that we do want to try to avoid masking as students. But to just summarize, we want to kind of consider each school individually because some students have expressed that if there were to be a mandate to be imposed, there will be conflicts between administration, staff, and students. And we lose trust when we impose these mandates without really listening to the students as well. So yeah, if a mandate was to be put in place, students want that, they want us to reduce the amount of repercussions for the student experiences. So this also includes like extracurriculars. So if there was a mandate, we want to make sure that, you know, extracurriculars are still running, band is still running, we're still allowing for contact sports, and we're still fully keeping cafeterias open. These are things that students have expressed. There's also people who have expressed that their opinion is honestly indifferent, so their opinion completely depends on like the time period that we give. So indefinitely does not really make much sense, I think, in our opinion. Just if you give an indefinite, we have no idea where this is going and we don't really have a direction. So just to kind of wrap up, I would like trustees to just like visualize what the masking mandate will look like in schools. Because students and staff are the ones that will actually be, you know, visualizing and living through these masking mandates. So we have to kind of think of the practicality of this motion. As a board, we speak for majority, but even more importantly, we also speak for minority. So in conclusion, I would be supportive of the motion if the following conditions were maybe separately considered. So if we were to do a motion, we have to give a timeline. This could mean before or until break, or just giving some timeline that allows students to understand that we actually have an active plan and we're not just like, you know, monitoring or whatever. We like have a plan to put in place. Also, maybe only during instructional periods or times where social distancing should be considered. So we want to make sure that it's very like barrier-free and we're not forcing masking when it's not super necessary. I would also like trustees just to think of a plan on evaluating the effectiveness of this mandate, because what we're like, our goal is to make sure that we're protecting students, right? So we want to have that plan on evaluating the effectiveness. And this could be through COVID checks, self-reporting, or education on the viruses and prevention methods. Finally, so there's just like having this motion is kind of a layered approach. So we are trying to protect the vulnerable, and this might mean that we can start mandating masks for perhaps specific age groups or like elementary students like we did with the COVID pandemic. As we promote people to stay at home when sick, we also have to determine ways that we're supporting students when they're at home with like resources. This could mean providing them with grace periods, resources, any ways that we can support kids when they're sick and when they're at home. And lastly, just promoting awareness and bringing awareness on the various sicknesses and maybe even the different masks to be, or yeah, just like providing information that's more digestible to the community so that they're actually aware of our decision tonight. So just, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list, I have student trustee Mahmood.
Thank you, and through the chair, I just wanted to, first of all, thank staff for giving us some clarity. I know that was something that we discussed at the last board meeting, and we've all spent the last 2 weeks mulling over this decision and considering all the questions that we asked. And now that we have the information laid out in front of us, there are several facts that are kind of, there are several truths that aren't really up for debate at this point. almost 3 years into the pandemic, we know for a fact that masks prevent the spread of airborne illnesses. We know for a fact...
Please, to the gallery, can we allow our student trustee to speak?
We know for a fact that students getting sick and not having a safe environment to learn in has detrimental effects on their well-being and their achievement. And so over these past 2 weeks, myself and student trustee Lee have had the opportunity to speak with a group of student representatives from across our school board. And so in this role, I don't claim or to represent the voices of all students, but one observation that I have made in speaking with our elementary group, which is grade 7 to 8, is that after providing context for our last board meeting and speaking to them about the realities of the public health crisis and hearing them share their observations about the students in their classrooms who were missing school or who were consistently sick and were seriously harmed by it, I saw a room full of 12 and 13-year-olds display such a tremendous capacity for compassion and understanding and responsibility, and coming to a conclusion that, yeah, maybe I can wear a mask to protect the students around me who are extremely vulnerable. This motion, as it's written right now, does not prevent anyone who feels like they do not want to wear a mask from not doing so. But as we heard from one of our delegates earlier today, an opt-out versus opt-in system significantly increases masking, and we know that it works when it's done on a large basis and lots of students are participating in it. So these are all the considerations that I think should be going into tonight's decision. At the end of the day, I know I can't adequately represent the voices of a lot of our vulnerable students, but they should be at the forefront of this and they should have a safe learning environment as well. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Student Trustee Mahmood. I see Trustee Wong. Go ahead.
I would just like to start off and say through the chair, how disappointed I am that there's adults in the room that are silencing the voice of students right now. I'm so disappointed. We're better than that. Yeah.
Please, to the gallery, I really need you to allow us to continue the meeting. We're at 9:50 and we'll have to extend the meeting. If you were going to continue speaking, I will have to get additional people to leave the room. So Trustee Wong.
I just want to share some of the things that I've been seeing within my own inbox. Parents who they're screaming for help and they don't know where to go because obviously the provincial government is not supporting us where we need support. And this motion on the floor offers everyone the opportunity to opt out if they so wish. It is open, it is clear. We need to take a community-based approach where we're respecting and we're engaging with individuals within our community and we're keeping our immunocompromised and our most vulnerable communities safe. And this motion does that, but it respects the voices of others who are saying that they don't want to wear masks in schools. This motion says that. It is not punitive in any nature, and it's very clear in saying that if you don't wish to wear a mask, you can opt out. And
to the gallery, if you cannot be quiet, I'm going to have to clear the gallery. We do need to continue with our meeting. That is your last warning. Go ahead, Trustee Wong.
We continue to see kids getting sick in schools, whatever the sickness may be. And if our most vulnerable communities are asking for this, and they're asking for equitable classrooms, they're asking for equitable facilities for their children to go to school and for kids to go to school, then we as educators and we as elected officials, when I see in my inbox and I'm getting calls and I'm speaking to the community and they're asking and they're begging me to vote for and to support a mask motion and to support kids, preventing kids from getting sick in schools, I need to listen. And that's what I've seen within my inbox, and we need to take the step forward and keep our vulnerable communities safe. And if this is the step we need to take, then I'm full on for supporting this motion that's here on the table. And I think that it does encompass a lot of community consultation, and it's non-punitive in nature.
Thank you, Trustee Wong. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Trustee Buck.
Thank you very much, and through the chair, I'd like to thank the mover of the motion, the spirit of collaboration that you've that has been kind of central to the work that you've been doing the last 2 weeks as in your role have been evident, and so and grateful for that intention in the work that has been done on his end leading up to tonight. I'm thankful also to all those who took the time to come tonight, who've been emailing. There are many different angles to this conversation that we do need to be listening to. There's no simple answer forward. I won't belabor certain points. I do want to just make one comment for now. The logic behind wearing masks early in the pandemic in 2020 was that everyone was wearing them in everywhere that they went, as well as we were limiting movement of people. And those combined efforts, along with many other layers of protection, helped us to manage when spikes occurred. They helped us to limit hospitalizations. There was a multi-prong approach. This motion, I think, well-intentioned, I do fear that it won't have the desired effect of limiting overall transmission of illness within our schools, given that there are necessary exemptions, and as well as this wouldn't be in other facets of public life. You can still go to the grocery store, you're still going to karate class, you're still going to play dates or whatever. There's nothing limiting transmission in other fields. So I don't know that it will have the desired effect, but I do very much fear that there would be unintended consequences, including undue stress for our staff and our students, including increased workload for our staff, including generally just chaos overall for staff and students in a time where literally 2.5 years, everyone has literally known little else but stress and chaos. And I think that it's beyond us and what we are capable at this table of, in our very well-intentioned, and I so appreciate that heart in my colleagues, but we won't see the effect that we are desiring. Nobody wants to see children in the hospital because of COVID, because of RSV or the flu. But I don't see this as the way forward. I see this as adding to an already stressful situation that our kids have had to cope with for 2.5 years. I think of really the human rights behind why someone might not want to mask. I think of our students who have autism, of those who have speaking disability, speaking as a person with that disability. I can't imagine what that would be like for a child to not have access to their teacher's mouth for 2.5 critical years of their learning. Nope, you guys were told to not talk. Okay, there are a lot of reasons for us to want to do something. I don't think this is that something. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Next I had Trustee Mulholland.
Thank you. Through the chair. May come as a surprise, but I will not be supporting this motion, mainly because I know I'll be in a minority, but the main thing is that I strongly believe in parental choice in a democratic process.
Can we please keep the applause down?
And the other reason is that when I look at this motion, you did an awful lot of work on it. I appreciate that. However, it's not doable. It cannot be worked. There's half of it. I know what it is, but you don't know. There's buildings in here that you've never known before. So you say all buildings, it's not doable. So that's a problem. But my main thing is, like I said, and I congratulate you only once. The other thing is that I'll go back and saying that I'm making that decision based on what I believe should be the parental choice, and it's gotta be in this issue. I mean, I know when a parent sends, and also staff, they've got to have the right to make their own decision. I know that parents are responsible. When the child gets to the front door of the public school, the principal becomes the parent. And I don't want to be putting all this back on the principals. It's a responsibility of me as a parent, me as a great-grandparent of 6 great-grandchildren, and all in elementary school. I will be talking to my granddaughter about this because it's her responsibility till it gets to that door. But you've got to send them with the right mindset. If you send them saying, go ahead, you don't need a mask, with all the latest is improvement. The thing is that when I look at all those numbers, 2% here, but we never had the increase in enrollment or the increase in staffing. We just said it went down 2%, but staffing went up 4%. So that's why it went up. I mean, they're the questions you ask. However, I'll get off the horse here. I'm not changing my mind.
Thank you. I do need a motion to extend the meeting. I'm going to suggest a motion to extend by 30 minutes. Trustee Tutt, seconded by Trustee White. Thank you. All in favor? Motion to extend. Extend, yeah, it's 10. Trustee Archer, thank you. In favor? Trustee Mulholland opposed. That passes. Thank you. Okay, is there anyone else that wishes to speak to the motion? Oh, I know. Sorry, I'm just double checking. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to the motion? I will put myself on the speakers list. And just to help facilitate, it's challenging to be the role of chair and also the role of an individual trustee. If it's okay, I'm going to turn the chair over to Vice Chair Miller so I can make my remarks and ask a few questions.
Thank you. Go ahead, Trustee Dangle.
Thank you. So like I've heard around the table, I think there's a great appreciation for the amount of thought and work that went into this motion, the collaboration that went into it. But I have a few questions for staff because there's a number of red flags for me that I want to make sure that I understand what the impacts would be on the system. So I'm just going to ask through the chair to the director, for example, are there any challenges with implementing or operationalizing this motion? I'm just noting that not only does it talk about HWDSB buildings, it also talks about HWDSB-led activities that would be indoors that could be in another building. It also talks about providing evidence of an opt-out. So, and it also talks about people wearing a medical mask, which we know the ministry's provided cloth masks for students. So those are some things that I've noted. I was wondering if this creates challenges for implementing. Through the chair.
Director?
Thanks very much for the question, and thank you for some of the things that you noted that I was also wondering about, such as the HWDSB-led activities held indoors. I think I would need more clarification on that. I'm particularly concerned about the written medical exemptions based on the basis of documented disability. I would say that that is not in line with what we have previously done. I'm concerned that this is personal medical information that we would be requesting, and I don't know that that is the route that we want to take or whether we have the authority to do that. So that would be very different than the barrier-free that we were discussing. I'm also, I guess I'm wondering about the opt-out, the individual opt-outs be made available to all staff and students, along with the provision of any reason shall constitute grounds for exemption. it seems to me that we're looking for, I'm not sure what the explanation is. I guess, again, I have a question about that. It said would require an explanation. I think about inside our schools, the human resources that would need to be put into this following up. I'm not sure. I guess I need more clarification to understand what that is. And I'm also thinking about, first there is exemptions. I'm wondering about if that is really what the intention is to write there. Exemption shall be offered. And then you talk about individual opt-outs. So I have questions within the motion of things that I don't understand in order for staff to be able to carry this out. I'm also concerned that I think the intention, and I may have heard this said, but the intention of the motion, first of all, again, as I said last time, I have such respect and admiration for the impetus behind the motion in terms of supporting our students' well-being. And I'm thinking about overall well-being. And for me, part of that is that positive culture and climate that we have in our schools. And I'm just hopeful that a motion would not cause further rifts in our schools in terms of implementing. That's my initial thought, and I know I asked some questions. Thank you.
Chair Danko, would you like to respond?
Well, thank you. I'll just make my remarks, I think, because that confirms some of the challenges that I see with the motion, with the specific statements and direction that would be provided. For me, I think what's been said is really important. We are at a pivotal time where action is needed, but we need that action to be regional and provincial, and we're really lacking leadership at that level. I could absolutely support something like this refined that would be more like the supportive, non-punitive approach we took back when we, increased exemptions to K to 3 back in August of 2020, and that we did when we extended our mask mandate. But at this time, without it being regional or even within the city of Hamilton, if you go out anywhere, and I was one of few people masked at the mall on the weekend, you'll see that through extracurriculars outside of the school, people are not wearing masks. And part of what we heard from public health, and we've heard time and time again, is that what has helped during COVID and what helps with respiratory illnesses is a layered approach. It is increasing masking, which I would like to see in our schools, and I think we've taken steps to start to do that and can do more. It is screening and not attending school or work when you're ill. It is making sure that people are hand washing, disinfecting, which that may be happening to some degree, but not in the way it was when we were at the height of COVID. So when I think about all of the measures that had the intended outcome, which is really reducing the risk of COVID, and let's extend that to respiratory illnesses, I don't believe this will achieve that outcome. Instead, I think what it will lead to is significant amount of staff time, significant conflict potentially, because it's framed in a way that I don't see as supportive, but instead talks about consequences for violations. So because of that, I would rather we continue our work to ask people to wear a mask, to encourage them, and maybe increase education, as we heard in the presentation. That's one of the key things that helped every September, is that education piece. Adding signs to our schools, we talked about that last time. Again, promoting screening, disinfection, all of that. I appreciate the work that's been done to date. I think that needs to continue. And I've heard also that making masks available in all of the common spaces, classrooms, schools, instead of on request, would be another way that we can achieve our intended goal, which is really increasing masking. So for those reasons, I can't support this motion, but I do appreciate why it's come forward and the work that's been put into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Danko, and I'll turn the chair over back to you.
Thank you for that, Vice Chair Miller. Are there any further speakers to the motion who haven't yet spoke? Vice Chair Miller?
Thank you, and through the chair, I find it really funny because I got an email a week ago from my children's ballet studio that told me very frankly, masks are mandated in that building from here on in. So I always find the ability of the private sector to decide what they will do for the health of their participants in such stark contrast with what public leaders are tasked to do. The reality is that we know how the conversation at the Ottawa Public School Board went. It's a conversation that has been happening at many tables, and as it's been highlighted multiple times this evening, it doesn't seem to be happening at the most important table, which is the table for the Ministry of Education. Even though they actually over and over and over again recommend masks indoors, as does our Hamilton Public Health. So everyone that I've heard against more active masking seems to love to cite that, but they actually forget that the recommendation is that we all should be masking indoors right now. I also find it interesting, and I'm really torn because I'll share my own personal anecdote that I have 3 children, one of which is 10, a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, and my youngest has a lisp and has probably had a lisp longer because of, to be honest, because of masks. And I share that not to be flippant. I share that because I'm also a concerned parent, but I'm a community member too. And maybe some people will regard what I'm about to say with disdain, but my partner and myself working with my youngest to address her lisp for a little bit longer, if it means the protection of her peers, if it means the protection of, folks who are immunocompromised, I'm okay to take that on myself because I feel capable to take that on. Stop it.
We're going to have someone step out of the meeting. Sorry, it is not your role here is not to speak. I apologize, but we'll get you to leave. Thank you for leaving. Please carry on, Trustee Miller.
Sorry, thank you. So everyone, we do have to, as individuals, as adults, as families, we do have to make these choices. As it's been highlighted by Trustee Wong and one of our previous delegators or delegation participants, we know this is likely not going to get us to 100% masks. The motion that has before me still does have personal parent choice. You do have to read it in order to look for it. So I do respect that we don't want to be the only ones having these conversations. And I thank you so much to our student trustees who highlighted the very difficult conversations that they are having at their age that I certainly was not having to have with my peers at their age or when I was their age. But I think really what lies here is what can we do to increase masking? How do we do it? I hear a lot of conversation about the fact that people who choose to not be masked don't want to be ostracized for their decision. But I don't feel like I have heard or seen how we support children right now who want to mask but can't or don't feel capable of it because their peers aren't masked.
To the gallery, I have warned you multiple times, so if you cannot be quiet, we are going to have to clear the gallery. You do not get to respond to the meeting. So if there's any more speaking, I will call a recess and we will clear the gallery so that we can complete our meeting and you can watch it downstairs. I'm sorry, can I ask you to leave the meeting, please? You can leave the meeting. I've warned you twice. Can you please leave the meeting? Okay, I'm going to call a recess. I need a seconder for that, and we're going to clear the gallery. Thank you. You're welcome to watch downstairs, but I've got a seconder, Trustee Wong. All in favor? That is Trustees White, DeHaab, Fairman, I don't know about Mulholland. Recess to then clear the gallery. Recess to clear the gallery. Miller, Danko, Tutt, Wong, Student Trustee Lee, Student Trustee Mahmood, and Trustee Noble. And so we're just going to take a 5-minute recess. Trustees, you can exit through the side door. You are welcome to observe online downstairs. There's a viewing area, but unfortunately we do need to complete our meeting and the disruptions are not working. Thank you.
Everybody else. Oh, yes. Everybody else has to wear a mask. Yeah.
Sorry, everybody's got to go. Go downstairs. You can watch the same meeting.
I don't know how people have heart. Protected paychecks. To protect paychecks. To
I'll come back to you.
protect the paychecks. To muscle the kids. The kids. Who doesn't have kids? They don't have heart. There's people who has kids. But they're protecting their paycheck. That's what they're doing. They're working for government.
Well, if my kid will be master. If you don't like it, move on. You might not have these difficulties if you actually gave us an opportunity to speak a little bit more. Well, like we're taxpaying citizens, we feel we have the right to express some kind of opinion. Yeah.
You said this is not the place or the way to do it. So what is your suggestion? What do we do? Public consultation meetings. So we do send emails, and I know of expert, very, very expert people
welcome.
Thank you for your patience online. If I can ask everyone to take their seats. I need silence from anybody that's here. I appreciate we've got media, some union partners, some people who have committed to silence so that we can continue our meeting. We've got 4 minutes until we need an extension for this meeting, and I believe Trustee Mulholland did have to leave. Okay. Were you finished speaking? Trustee Miller had the floor when we had our interruption.
Thank you, Chair Danko. I'll be quick because I know it's getting late and we're sort of talking in circles. So I'm supportive of the spirit of the motion. I still firmly believe that it does allow parent choice. And we know that there will be families who will decide to not participate for whatever personal reasons or medical reasons, and we acknowledge that. I believe that my biggest concern here, though, is around the language of consequences. Just wanted to highlight that as a personal concern that I see here. I agree with the remarks made by the chair that I would see that as punitive and not in the spirit of our previous exemptions, as well as I'm concerned about the amount of staff work that would entail. So those are my comments for this portion of the evening, but thank you to my colleagues for listening.
Thank you. I believe I saw Trustee Archer. Oh, sorry, just have the mover. Is there a point of clarification or?
Yes, I would just like to actually withdraw this motion for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Noble. So you've withdrawn the motion as written. Trustee White, I see your hand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to piggyback on Trustee Noble's withdrawal, I would like to move a new motion based entirely on the spirit of Trustee Noble's work, if I may. Thank you.
Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'd like to move, with the support of Trustee Noble, that staff operationalize a temporary universal masking requirement with an unrestricted option to opt out in all HWDSB schools, and that the temporary requirement be renewable at the first board meeting in January.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just going to repeat that back and make sure it's correct. That staff operationalize a temporary universal masking requirement with an unrestricted option to opt out in all HWDSB schools, and that the temporary requirement be renewable at first board meeting in January. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and did I have a seconder? Trustee Noble. Okay, we'll do the circle again. Trustee White is the mover, if you'd like to speak to your motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have been a trustee of few words this evening, and for the first time, I'll try to keep it that way because it is getting late. But I don't want to take.
I'm going to interrupt right now and ask you first to move an extension.
So moved by 15 minutes.
15 minutes, and seconded by Vice Chair Miller. Thank you. All in favor? That is everyone with Trustee Archer. Are you in favor of an extension of 15 minutes? Thank you. That's unanimous, with Trustee Mulholland having left the meeting. Okay, carry on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I take no credit for this motion. It's entirely based on what we had heard from Trustee Noble. I think what this motion does is takes information provided by the director and how this motion can be operationalized. I think while I support everything that Trustee Noble had said, I think in kind of charting this new territory, this allows staff the ability to operationalize on the ground some of the challenges of a universal masking requirement. It also respects parent choice. I know we're hearing around this table that parent choice is very important. This allows parents to continue to have that choice. The difference with this approach, however, is that this is, if this motion passes, it is an opt-out approach versus the opt-in approach that we currently have. And just really briefly, because I didn't speak to the last motion, what inspires me, I think, most about speaking up on this topic is that as a school board, or as school boards in general, we are the only elected officials with students as their primary mandate. And unlike other levels of government, we are entirely focused on students. And we know that we have a pediatric crisis in Hamilton. And seeing as many of these individuals and students that, or children that are affected are in fact our students, and we have a direct impact, I feel a responsibility to respond and find a way that we can do this with the assistance of our communities and the buy-in from our communities. So I believe, in closing, that this motion can gain considerable support, both from our communities, our schools, our staff, our students, and it also gives us the ability to operationalize the new standard that we are proposing, and it also allows us to renew this standard or requirement at the first board meeting in January. So we know, as I think Trustee Tutt mentioned through some of his earlier comments, we may see spikes in January. This allows us to roll with the latest news and respond with responsibility and accountability. So I hope that this motion speaks to most of the concerns that we've heard this evening and accomplishes most of what Trustee Noble had sought out to achieve this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee White. As the seconder, Trustee Noble, would you like to speak to the motion?
I will be very short. I realized very quickly upon discussion of the previous motion that there were amendments in order, as well as concerns that have been raised by trustees and staff as to the depth in answering many of the questions that were raised at the previous meeting. And I hope that, given the generality of this motion, that there is plenty of room to accommodate for changes and adapt to the needs of the community as well as of our schools. So I am very much in support of this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Okay, I'm just going to add myself if I can turn the chair over.
Sure, thank you.
I just want to do a check-in with staff to make sure that there is clear enough direction, recognizing this is much more general and flexible, does provide unrestricted opt-out. So, essentially this is improving, I suppose, language so that we're essentially trying to increase masking in schools, but there is an element of choice. But I would like to just understand from staff if there's enough clarity around this or any challenges that they have or questions they have for operationalizing it.
Thank you, Director.
Thanks very much, Chair. Through you, thank you so much for the consideration. As I said at the last meeting, and I hope that I've said clearly this evening, student well-being is right now, I think, more a priority than ever before. Our students have, lived through the pandemic and had lots of impact in negative ways on their well-being and on their learning. And so I As director, a really important focus right now is to support student learning and well-being. This mandate, I understand that the spirit of this motion, also goes to support student well-being and staff well-being, so we appreciate that. I believe there's enough information within it for staff to be able to operationalize this, and as I said previously, we want to respect everyone's human rights. We want to ensure that it's not cumbersome and that we're not asking for private medical information. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Danko, any follow-up?
Thank you. As chair of the board, I have to be the spokesperson for the board, and so if this were to pass, it's something I would need to be able to speak to. And I think the one point that would be made, perhaps by those who prefer not to wear a mask, is that while we're calling it a universal masking requirement, if there's an unrestricted option to opt out, it's not really a mandate. And I think that's sort of the key point, is we're not asking for a mandate. We're looking to improve masking by making it a quote-unquote requirement, recognizing people will have choice and that our staff will have to figure out how best to operationalize that so that it doesn't put a burden on administrators, it doesn't create conflict within the schools, but we've given staff the flexibility to do that in a good way, because I truly believe that if we want people to change their behaviors and consider how to protect themselves, but to protect others in a lot of cases, it needs to be in a supportive, non-punitive way. So I think this achieves that. So I can support this motion as it stands. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Danko, and I'll turn the chair back over to you.
Thank you. Just looking for any final comments or questions. Seeing none, I'll go back to the mover for closing remarks.
I just simply want to reiterate and thank everyone involved in these discussions. I know it's been a lot of work, and I am hopeful that when we do review this requirement, that we have similarly positive discussions that will have positive impacts on our schools. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just checking online. Trustee Archer, I should have done a double check. Did you want to speak? I know that's not quite in the order we're supposed to do, but please go ahead since I neglected to check on you. So the motion asks that staff operationalize a temporary universal masking requirement. So they would be telling students that and staff that masks are required, but it's with an unrestricted option to opt out. So basically, people have a choice not to wear a mask, but the language would be around it being a requirement. And to the director, on the question how this might be operationalized, and would we be encouraging and educating on wearing masks, if I'm framing that correctly?
Thanks very much for the question. Through the chair, that would be part of the implementation of the motion, would obviously center on education and on the accessibility of the masks, and really ensuring that we communicate, I think, tremendously around the availability and the importance of following this measure with unrestricted option to opt out. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Archer, any follow-up? Were you able to hear that okay? Okay, thank you. Sorry that I should have checked online for your hand before I went to the closing remarks. So with that, I'll go to a motion. All in favor? Okay, that is Trustee White, Dahab, Miller, Danko, Tut, Wong, Noble, Student Trustee Lee, and Mahmood. And Trustee Archer, if you can signal for or against. That's in favor. Thank you. So that does pass. Oh, and that's with, what's that? Against. Oh, and those opposed would be trustees Buck and Fairman. Okay. And trustee Mulholland is not in the meeting. Oh, sorry. Can you just confirm, trustee Archer, are you for or against? Against. Okay, thank you. So trustees Buck, Fairman, and Archer are opposed. So that does carry, and we will move along. I'm wondering if, so we've got 5 minutes. So we've got, next is the report from committee of the whole, and I might recommend that we defer item 11 to our next board meeting. I'll turn to the vice chair to bring the report from committee of the whole private session from earlier this evening.
Thank you, and through the chair, I'm happy to bring forward the following. One, that the audit committee report from November 10th, 2022 be received. And two, that legal options were received by the Board of Trustees. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's move to receive. Do I have a seconder? And if I could ask people to be quiet as they leave. Thank you, trustee Noble. Any questions? And please, if I can invite you to leave, can you please leave the boardroom? Thank you to our security. Okay, all in favor of the committee of the whole report? And that is everyone. Trustee Archer, just checking on your vote. Trustee Archer, just checking on the vote for the report from committee of the whole.
Because you're working for.
Can you please leave the boardroom?
Okay, all kids are gonna come
Off you go. Trustee Archer, just need to confirm if you're voting on receiving the report from committee of the whole. Can you? Thank you. So that passes. I'm going to move to defer our oral reports from liaison committees unless there's something urgent. Oh, and so a seconder, trustee Wong. Any questions or comments on deferring that to our next board meeting? Seeing none, all in favor? That is unanimous. And trustee Archer, just deferring the oral reports from liaison committees. Thank you. And I'll need a motion to adjourn. Trustee Wong, seconded by trustee Tutt. All in favor? Thank you. That is unanimous. Thank you to those who have stuck it out. And I know that was a long meeting. If anybody would like to reach out, I'm happy to have a conversation anytime. But thank you, everyone.